online, unless anybody has something that I don't know about. Okay, so without objection, we'll consider the agenda approved. So on to general business and appearances. And so this is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the council on some topic that is otherwise not on our agenda. And if you would, if you have anything to say, as with all other comments generally speaking tonight, if you would say your name, where you live, and try to keep your comments, I'll just say brief for now. So any comments from the public?
Sure they weren't on the agenda first. I will be brief, but I'm going to talk fast because I have a lot of ground to cover. Steve Whitaker. I want to open a discussion that's going to obviously take several meetings and maybe even an agenda item to explore further. I've titled the document Seriously Misplaced Priorities. This is a compilation from dozens of Montpelierites that I've been reaching out and meeting with. When we're spending $200,000 for wayfinding signs, millions on a bike path and bridge, millions on a multimodal transit center with no rail platform, and so many dollars, I don't know, on the downtown master plan with an uncertain GRAS prospects, while we have obvious unmet needs, priorities on stopping the sewer gas from arising from the storm drains right around State and Main, East State and Main. It's a serious problem. That blanket kept one of them blocked for the last 3 or 4 days. I took it off because the rain is coming, but if anybody needs a whiff, it's there. It's absorbed plenty, it's wool. Paving drainage at the crosswalks I've been bringing to your attention for years, and it has not been addressed. The paving effort made a month ago still does not drain. I've got photos of all this, and we're heading into winter again. So we're gonna have ice in the crosswalks, which is a real safety hazard, and somebody's gonna get hurt. Clean and safe streets. We got trip hazards. The sidewalks are heaving. We just grind them off and bevel them, so there's still a 2 or 3 inch level differences. We've got a sinkhole out on St. Paul Street that's big enough for a kid's leg to fall in and break. Missing and haphazard curbstones, the curbs that were removed for the Main Street break, East State Street break have not been put back in. The street sweeping has been skipped for 3 weeks until yesterday morning, and even then it left a trail of dirt, a mounded trail of dirt which continues to blow around. Who's supposed to clean up the broken glass, the feces, the vomit, etc.? This stuff has been happening, and everybody says, not me, not me. The vacuum cleaner for the sidewalks I've raised as an option, as a good alternative. No action, no response. We need to fundamentally and as soon as possible stop the combined sewer overflow dumping human waste into the river untreated. CV PSA, CV fiber, I have not heard back from my report on that problem. We're at risk of losing that multi-$100,000 investment. Our police chief is in a position to help expedite the records request for those tower infrastructure of Capitol West, and he is in effect saying, I don't have them, while he's writing an RFP with Scott Bagg, who is one of his part-time dispatchers. We can't have officials, public officials on the public dime, impeding public records requests and pointing at the other guy. Last year's Christmas wreath, I've mentioned before, still sitting right out here outside your window. SD Ireland spilling that road base down the riverbank into the river, got a free pass apparently, even though I called it to your and the state's attention. The missed opportunities, the truck, I got 1 more minute, the truck access to keep the tractor trailers from parking in Main Street. We're gonna miss that opportunity to integrate trucks through the new parking lot into the North Branch lot. The city, our new Public Works Director is now aware of it. The city needs to forfeit 4 spots in the North Branch lot in exchange for Aubuchon moving their propane tank and creating a path exiting by the old Pocket Park we're missing an opportunity with electric vehicle recharging stations in the new lot. What better way to bring tourists to Vermont, to Montpelier, to shop and eat while their cars are charging than to simply put chargers there available to them? We have been charging people on the 4th of July and on Bennington Battle Day for meters unfairly. I'd asked the city council to refund everyone who paid by credit card. And it's a missed opportunity for the merchants to have paid for the bags that say free holiday parking, and the bags are courtesy of the merchants, right? It's just a simple goodwill, good advertising, but charging people when they shouldn't be charged is not right. Put the Saturday State and Main stoplight into flashing mode. We're backing up all the way to the Rotary and backing up to Memorial Drive with traffic, even because they're making a turn for State Street traffic which isn't there during the farmers market. So I talked to the programmers working down at Bailey today. A city official with the key can simply put that light into flashing mode from 6 a.m. or leave it in flashing mode from 6 a.m. till 2. That would solve the problem. Postpone the downtown master plan until the garage appeals are resolved. I'm told that the consultant has been directed to plan as if the garage is going in. That is a mistake. It's unfair to the people. It's unfair to the appellants. It's a waste of money.
You're close, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you could use a heat pump to capture the heat from that computer room. It's a noise impediment in here, and heat the water for the downstairs bathrooms with that. We need a comprehensive traffic study, including construction impacts, a rail study, satellite parking alternatives, pit alternatives, a visible log of all public records requests to the city, and a visible log of all correspondence in and out of the city, so that people know that a request has already been logged and don't repeat it. Thanks.
Thank you.
I know it's a lot.
No, it's okay. And there's some great ideas in there. All right, any other comments from the public?
I'm Sue Allen, and for 2 more days, I'm the Assistant City Manager. And I just wanted to take a minute to highlight 2 things I've learned in the last 2.5 years that I've been here. And the first is that you have some of the best city staff working for you I've ever encountered in my years in government. They work nights and they work weekends. And we do hear, week-to-week litanies of things that have gone wrong, and I want you to know they put it all, heart and soul, out there for the residents and the businesses of this city, and I applaud them. And I also want to just take a minute and applaud you all, because I have watched you for 2.5 years give up your nights and your weekends and answer all your constituents' questions and really put yourself out there for the public. And I want you to all pat yourself on the back for what a wonderful job you do. And I thank you for letting me work for you for the last 2.5 years. I've loved every minute of it, and I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Hello, my name is Seth Collins. I live in Berlin, Vermont. And at some point, I would like this council and the town of Montpelier to address the shooting deaths of Nate Giffen and Mark Johnson. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes. Yes.
In what format do you envision that?
And, couldn't you put it on the agenda for one of these meetings? Is that how it would go?
That's a possibility. We could.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks so
thank
much.
you. Yeah, for sure. Okay, any other comments? Okay, all right. So thank you all. Moving on. Onto the consent agenda. We did, sort of a last-minute catch, a pretty brief typo in the minutes. I don't know if it's appropriate to pull them.
Maybe the one I already adjusted.
Is it that Jack McCullough voted nay on an item that he did not vote nay on?
No.
Okay, there's that.
Let me go back and check.
Okay.
We should pull it.
Okay.
I'll want to go back.
Okay, because Jack, you didn't vote nay on the zoning fix regarding the Sabins pasture.
No,
Okay.
I might have moved it, I'm
Yeah, okay. Okay.
I'll have to go, I'll listen to the tape, sorry.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
I think Ashley might have voted nay on that.
She did, yep, and so that was recorded, but it also said that you had voted
Okay.
nay. All right. Anyway, so, so regarding the consent agenda, is there a motion regarding that?
So moved.
Is it with the absence of item A?
Oh, it is indeed, yeah.
Okay.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, further discussion. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thanks. And we'll look at those minutes at a later time. Okay, and so we have a couple of public hearings to do. So one of them is regarding the Vermont Community Development Program, and so I want to invite Eileen, and I don't know if Kevin is here for that too. Whoever. So this is a public hearing, so I'm going to officially open the public hearing on that. We'll hear from these folks, and then if there's comments from the public, we'll take them afterwards. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Would you like me to
Oh
just
yeah,
explain it a little bit?
just really briefly, like what are these for? And
Sure. So this is a Vermont Community Development Program using the Community Development Block Grant for what's called our Green Mountain Home Repair Program. This is a program that's been in existence for about 15 years. Because it's Community Development Block Grant, it requires a town or city to support it, as I think you all know. Previously, we've had the town of Northfield, we've had the city of Barry, and now we're asking Montpelier to step in. At this point, this is a consortium agreement. A few years back, we actually merged our program with the Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust, which serves Wyndham and Windsor counties. And Brattleboro is actually the lead community, so lucky for Kevin, they do all the paperwork. And all that we're really asking the city is to support the application, and all you need to do as far as work is really do the public hearing. So, and I did hand out a little bit, a brochure to all of you that explains what it is. So essentially it is a program available to low-income residents in Washington, Orange, and Lamoille County to do home repairs. I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. This brochure actually answers the questions that I had, which were specifically like what kinds of repairs would be eligible for
Right.
these kinds of grants, and just so everybody's aware, it's resolving health and safety issues like mold, asbestos, and lead paint, fixing structural problems like leaking roofs, or foundation issues, or wall issues, old or failing electrical, plumbing, septic, modifying the interior exteriors for elderly or disabled occupants, and then upgrades for energy efficiency, weatherization, air sealing, etc. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that, because I assume that if there's a homeowner in town, they should get in touch with the city if we receive these funds, or how would somebody
So if
about
they're
accessing this?
interested in the program, I did leave a brochure over there, but they can reach out to Downstreet and we
Okay.
can work you through the process. So it is for low-income individuals, so 80% area median income or below. And typically it is funding of last resort. So if people are not able to get financing through a traditional bank, they're able to do it through us. And right now, and this happens occasionally, right now we do actually have the ability to offer part of the money through grant, and it is a loan program, but many of the loans are actually 0% deferred, so you're not actually making payments on them, and that's
Yeah.
one thing that's sort of challenging about this program is people tend not to apply because they think they can't afford debt, but if they
Yeah.
can't actually afford the debt, we still can work with them.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. I'm sorry, I have one more question. How do you get the word out about this kind of program?
So we do a fair amount of advertising in the paper. We have on occasion, and we can certainly do this again, had done it as an insert, in a tax bill or something like
Okay.
that. So we usually do that, in the larger communities every other year. So
Sure.
we can certainly do that in Montpelier.
I think that would be wonderful.
Just as an aside, is that, I kind of have in contact with Patty at Home Street pretty frequently, so I'm referring people, and there's a pipeline, so that
Okay.
if people have questions, they can come to me, and I can
Okay.
direct them to the right person.
And they would ultimately go to Downstreet.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay,
Yep.
wonderful. Any other questions? Any comments from the public? Oh, Lauren.
Is this like a first come, first serve kind of thing? Or, I mean, I was excited to see the energy efficiency, knowing that we're doing this whole energy efficiency ordinance conversation and the ability to help lower income folks access money to do the kinds of things that we're hoping more people will do. Is it just kind of whoever comes in the door and whatever kinds of projects are eligible, or are there kind of buckets for different kinds of projects?
So there aren't buckets. All of them are eligible. It is first comes, first served, but we do actually have a fair amount of capital that's accumulated. The idea of this is that so the people who are repaying are refurbishing the capital, so it's a revolving loan fund. So we haven't reached a point where we've had to say no because there isn't capital. More likely what happens with this money is you have to income qualify one, and when we go into a home, we are required to meet what's called housing quality standards. So people may want to do energy efficiency work, but if the roof is failing, it has to be addressed, and then sometimes the project gets too large and people feel uncomfortable with that amount of debt, even if they're not paying on it. So sometimes that's a challenge.
Gotcha.
But
And this money is, on the whole, divided up amongst different counties. So there's a certain amount for Washington County?
No.
Okay.
No, so it's great that you're asking me these questions and we're advertising it. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
in
Great.
Montpelier.
Excellent. So we should,
Yeah, it's first
we
come,
should be
first
applying.
serve within the five the
Okay.
5 counties. But like I said, there is a fair amount of capital available.
Okay. Well, great. And if you have a question, go ahead.
Peter Kelman, College Street. I think the mayor's question about how do people find out about this is a very good question, and the answers were not as good as the question. The very people who need this money are people who need outreach to them, not to come by your office, Kevin, and get in the, quote, pipeline. There needs to be an affirmative effort to reach people of low income and to let them know that there's money to help them.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions, Peter, as to what more could be done?
Well, it does relate to my larger concern about communication in town. There are people who know things and people who don't. There are people who know where to look and people who don't. There needs to be some kind of rethinking of how government communicates to the poorer people in town, the people who rent, the people who have homes that they own but can't afford to fix them up, people who are homeless. We just need to figure out, I have some ideas, but I think that setting up the task force on homelessness is the kind of thing that I think is a good beginning. But there are people who have homes who also need some attention like that. So I don't have an answer, but I think that it's something that we need to tackle.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Erica Rail of Vermont Center for Independent Living. We actually have an information line at our center where we've referred people to this program. And we work primarily with people that are low income and disabled. And it's a great program. People can call us, and we have referred and worked with Downstreet on many, many projects. So there is actually a place where people can go and get information on this. And it's actually, our number is statewide. So, and we also have a database on this. So the information is being disseminated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
Did you have a question, Glenn?
Yeah, on that, can you give us any sense of how often you get calls on that line? Is that ringing off the hook once a month?
Off the cuff,
Yeah.
I'd have to say weekly on just housing primarily. About 25 to 30 calls from homeowners. We're constantly retrofitting. And when I say retrofit, we're dealing with old housing stock here in Vermont. So we're putting ramps on. We go into a house. We see there's mold. They need new glass. We see that there's installations. So we're always working with Downstreet, USDA, weatherization programs. I mean, we partner with anybody who will help people with 80%, because we're working with the poorest of the poor out there. And we'll work with anybody. And Downstreet has always been a great program to work with.
25 or 30 a week?
A day,
Oh, a day?
yeah.
Wow. So people really are accessing that.
People are accessing these programs.
Okay,
And yeah, so it's a great program.
great, wonderful.
Steve Whitaker, Montpelier. I want to second the comments made by Peter regarding the awareness. This is a notice warned public hearing, and we're seeing the warning of the public hearing for the first time now. I would contrast that to all the publicity that was done around the Berry Street, Berry and Main intersection, or the energy efficiency. We really made an extended effort to make people aware of those things. It got in the press ahead of time. But this, I'm concerned that without having time to process and discuss this among folks, we're barreling down a track here that might not be reversible. It says that one application is for $375,000 to be shared among the 5 counties, or so many counties. Following item on the agenda is possibly a competing grant to the same program to take care of 3 buildings right here in Montpelier. So are we gonna have 2 grants? Is one gonna win out over the other? Can we get them both? But I believe we need a process whereby the priorities for how this money is spent are discussed and established in a more informed process than we've had so far on these grants.
So Stephen, I can actually answer some of those questions.
Okay, I really don't want to see another way and the other buildings that are housed.
So, Stephen, we're applying for the Another Way and Washington County Mental Health Grant is for a VCDP IG grant, an implementation grant. This is a scattered site, so there's separate things. Like, we could also apply for an accessibility modification grant in the same round, but there's 2 separate funding pools.
I guess
So it's not going to be competing.
I'm not gonna-
It's a separate.
okay.
It's a separate.
That's-
It's all the same funds, but separate pocket pools of funds.
That's good to know. What my point is being made is that there's not been enough discussion or education about these different pockets or pools, or what say anybody has. What's the point in holding a public hearing if the decisions are already made and people aren't informed about what choices are to be made in the public hearing?
To be aware, though,
Unless
too,
there's
we're
a second
applying
public
for-
hearing
we're-
coming.
But to
after-
be clear, we're applying for federal funding. This isn't a loan. We're not borrowing money. We're applying for federal funding through the Vermont Community Development Program.
I think
It's
I
a
made
grant.
my point, is that
Thank you.
it might merit a second public hearing and some pre-education about what choices or impacts or priorities might the community want to establish for this.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? I'm not sure if people are getting up to talk about this. Okay, no, okay. All right, so I'm going to close the public hearing. And I think we need a motion regarding this resolution. Am I correct in that?
I move that we authorize the department to submit the application for the VCDP scattered site grant.
I'll
as
second it.
outlined.
Further discussion? I just want to also say I'm so grateful for the outreach that's been done in the past and for the opportunities that people do have for accessing this. And I am happy to talk through any other ways that we can just get the word out and see about advertising it. I mean, I wonder if we could be posting something on Front Porch Forum to say, like, hey, that this money, exists. That might be a great way to get the word out. Anyway, so I'm just thinking out loud, but there's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, this motion passes. Thank you so much. And on to a second public hearing. This one is regarding grant. Actually, I will let you.
Sure.
I'll let you explain it.
The
You're
city,
opening the public hearing.
Oh,
is,
sorry. Before you do that, I'm
Sure.
going to officially open the public hearing on this.
oh yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, you beat me to that one.
Yeah.
And Amy Wright is going to join me. She's the consultant who's working with Another Way and Washington County Mental Health. And I can have Amy give some, and Sunny, correct? Yeah. We'll all come up.
Thank you.
So I was approached earlier this summer, or actually spring, I guess it was, that Washington County Mental Health and Another Way were looking to do some renovations in the buildings at 62, 90, and 125 Berry Street. 60 and 90 are owned by Washington County Mental Health, and 125 is Another Way. So there are a number of health and safety and actually, what's that?
Energy.
And energy efficiency projects that'll be tackled by these with these funds. So we would be the sponsor for these funds. They're applying for $625,000, and we're hoping that they receive it because these buildings are in dire need, and Berry Street, they're really cornerstones of Berry Street.
Great. Any questions? Donna?
Is there any local match? I didn't see it mentioned here. Did I miss it?
No, not currently. We do have access with the VCDP program. They can access our revolving loan funds if necessary. Generally speaking, we don't. Most projects can't afford to take on additional debt, and our revolving loan funds do require repayment in some cases. But no, we don't have a local match.
So we don't have one, or we don't need one?
It's not required. It's always
Oh,
helpful
okay.
when the city contributes something. But I think what we are saying is that the city has given Another Way tax exempt status, which is extremely valuable to the property, and Kevin's time in administering the grant. Without, you can charge for administering the grant, and we're not asking for funds for that. So, we're grateful for that. And other matching funds come from, Another Way has secured a number of smaller grants and saved its money from its fundraising. Washington County Mental Health has an organization-wide reserve that every penny is needed, is counted twice before it gets spent, but there's a portion of that will be going into the grant. We may need one more source. We're just looking into that as our final costs come in.
Further questions? Jack?
This isn't a question, but it's a comment. In my day job representing people in voluntary mental health proceedings, I regularly have people who are residents at 62 Berry Street, and I'm always arguing with the state that, the mayor and I have been on this committee hearing from Central Vermont Hospital about the expansion of their psych unit, and I'm always saying what we need to do is to support an adequate number of community resources in order to keep people who don't need to be in hospitals out of the hospitals. And I think this is the services provided in these facilities are very important.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? Comments from the public? Or questions? Yes.
Hi, Eileen Peltier, resident of Montpelier. I just wanted to speak on behalf of this application. I think that, as Councilor McCullough was saying, these types of programs are critically important. They're serving the most vulnerable people in our community. I was just hearing that Another Way served over 600 individual people in the past year. That's a big number. I've been in all of these buildings. They need help. and managing these budgets and doing the incredible work that these two organizations do every day, it's really challenging to do and to find the money to make the capital improvements that are needed. And the community development block grant is a great resource to do that. So I just want to say I support it and hope you do too.
Thank you.
Oh, you're next, Zach. Okay. Hi, I'm Rick DeAngelis. I live in Montpelier. I'm also the board chair of Another Way, so I have a bias here. But, you know, Another Way is an amazing organization. It's actually been providing a safe haven for the most vulnerable people in Montpelier for 35 years. And about 15 years ago, we bought the property on Barry Street. It was a wreck at that time. We managed to keep it going. And last year, with private financing, we did phase one. We did the most immediate needs of the building, but there's more that needs to be done. And the work that we're doing in this phase, it's all about providing people with the basics, to come in and get, you know, a warm meal, to use the bathroom, to do your laundry, and I think it's very important to them, but it's also important to the city at large that we have that capacity within Montpelier. So I hope you'll support the proposal.
Thank you.
I'm Zach Hughes, Montpelier, also Prospect neighbor. So I support the grant as well, as I'm familiar with facilities. And to Another Way, I have to say, you provide that sanctuary, plus you provide another option for folks who don't want to engage in traditional services. That option's important. And the other thing I wanted to say is I serve in capacities at Washington County Mental Health. And I also served in one of those committees that Jack just mentioned at the hospital. And I took 2 trips out to 2 different hospitals, one in Minneapolis and Pennsylvania, as part of this expansion project. And I, too, would argue for more community supports like peer crisis beds. We have one here in Montpelier called Maple House. So I just want to say I support these funds at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I didn't leave any ambiguity with my prior comments. I still like the outreach, my outreach plan. I do support this wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Donna?
Now, we need to sign a resolution, so we make a motion to
well,
adopt it, or what do we do now?
Those are attached.
Yep, so is there any
John
further
has one.
public comment? Okay, so we're going to close the public hearing on that, and then is there a motion regarding this? Yes,
I was going to
Donna.
make the motion to pass the resolution for the VCDP Grant Application Authority.
Second. Okay, further discussion. All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you all. Thank you for your work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so on to the appointments to the homelessness task force. And actually, as I am trying to access that on the internet, it's not working right now. That's exciting. It's possible. In any case, there were a number of people whose names and well, there's a number of people who expressed interest in serving on this committee, and I know a number of them are here, and so I would. We do have the list here. There are some additions to what was there, but in any case, if there's anyone here who is interested in this task force and is here tonight, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and explaining your interest in this, participating in this task force. And so that's one thing. And then actually now that I'm saying it, I wonder if it makes sense for us to start with the mission, so people sort of know more or less what they're signing up for. So actually, I think we should start with what is the goal of this? What are the outcomes that we are hoping for from this group? And I think we should probably have some kind of a motion regarding the task, and then we'll go to applicants. Does that sound okay with everybody? Okay, so we do have some language about what the task would involve to be on this committee. Any thoughts or comments on that language?
Well,
Yes.
one, in Jamie's email this afternoon, she mentioned there was going to be change from what was on the link. And I don't know if the printed one is the changed one or the same as on the
Just
link.
imagine it's on the link. I'll try to reach her and see if I can find out.
Okay.
Okay. One possibility is that if we don't have that answer, should we move on?
Ken Russell was the other person that had it.
Yes.
Because Yvonne emailed some things to Jamie.
Yeah. And did we get an email from Yvonne about updated language?
We did.
You did?
From Jamie forwarded it to all of us.
Oh, okay.
Well, she forwarded.
Yep.
Oh, Yvonne is here. Fabulous. I don't think I have it, so I would appreciate it. Thank you so much. Oh, okay. Got you. So this is the changed language. Okay. So thoughts on the charge of this committee?
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, but is it short enough that you could read it?
I think so. I can try to be quick. It's not terribly long. So this is as proposed from the head of the Community Justice Committee, as well as our Jamie. Not sure what Jamie's title is. Administrative
Assistant to the city manager.
Assistant to the city manager. There we go. Okay. So the Montpelier Homelessness Task Force is charged with providing the City Council with a report in 3 months that includes a couple bullet points. One, creative, collaboratively developed short-term ideas and/or solutions to improve conditions for the homeless. And 2, policy recommendations and concrete ideas for longer-term structural and systems improvement that the city could implement, along with the preliminary budget and timeline for duration of work and implementation. And then also, ideas and recommendations should be supported by data that includes, and some more bullets, one, information regarding the scope of homelessness in Montpelier and the needs of people experiencing homelessness in Montpelier. 2, the systems currently in place in our region to address homelessness. 3, the range of concerns, perceived barriers, and potential solutions identified by the community. And 4, existing strategies in other cities or states recognizing that the location of our city requires solutions that are responsive to our changing seasons. Does that help, Glenn?
Thank you.
Okay. Thoughts on that? Donna?
Well, I really like the changes, so thank you, Yvonne. And I like the clear goal of 3 months. It's a real good target.
I agree. Lauren?
I also like the charge and like that it's become more specific, which I think will help keep it focused and have a clear charge. Would this imply that it only exists for those 3 months, and then we would look at the longer-term recommendations and reassess if we need an ongoing task force, or should we be clear about what the timeline of commitment for people who are expressing interest?
That's a great question. My instinct is to say that we should assume that we would reevaluate that question in 3 months, and that group can make some kind of a determination as to whether or not they would like to continue or if there's more need, which, I mean, there's going to be more need. But in terms of, like, have they accomplished their task, and is there a different task, perhaps, that they would like to tackle?
Right, 'cause
we can evaluate perhaps at that time.
Yeah, because it seems like at that point they would need a different charge.
Right. Yep. I think that's fair.
Or they might recommend one.
Yeah.
Or amended,
Yeah, which
Right.
is perfectly fine. Donna, do you have something
I just
further?
wouldn't want to set it up to end in 3 months. I guess I see it as a broader group, and then along the way, you evaluate it. And 3 months is the goal to make the goals.
Connor?
Yeah, and I think you might like see the 10,000-foot view over these 3 months, and maybe there would be other like people who would sign up for it that could really narrow in on the more details of it. So,
Glenn?
At the same time, I think that one of the parts, sort of contrary to your 10,000-foot view, I think that's true that we would get that. Also, I like that the first focus point is short-term ideas and/or solutions to improve conditions right now, and I think we can find some of those within that 3 months. So I would say that's, honestly, I think that that's more important to me than the 10,000-foot view for now.
You know, in light of that, I actually wonder if that first charge, providing the city council with a report in 3 months that includes, creative collaboration, collaboratively developed short-term ideas. I mean, that really is a 3-month part, and then that second bullet, policies about longer-term structural changes, that could take more time. So I wonder if, we should be looking for some short-term recommendations in 3 months, and then looking for some longer-term recommendations further out. Any further comments about that from the council? Donna?
I guess, again, I'm backing off from over micromanaging the group.
Yeah.
That if we set them up, I would say like intention of a year appointment.
Okay.
If you need it. And then the goal is that within 3 months, they can report where they are with those 2 major items. And then they'll know what they can do and what they might decide a subgroup can do.
Fair.
Things could be broken up.
Cool, yeah, thank you. Stephen?
Steve Whitaker from Montpelier. I remind you that I asked that this be started back in March. Now winter's approaching, and we're kind of under the gun. I'd ask you to phrase your motion, whatever it is, or your purpose. I haven't seen that language. This is kind of awkward. I had offered some language. There's been a kind of a crowdsourcing refinement of language. But I think what you ought to do right now is leave it to the bare minimum and make the first charge of the task force to refine what they feel they're going to be able to accomplish in a year, and come back to you even at the next meeting with a refined scope. Give them a chance to meet, convene, assess the strengths and weaknesses of the group. And I also want to point out that one of the proposals was that there be a liaison, not necessarily a voting member from Barry and Berlin. I understand that Sergeant Bassett was willing to serve as a liaison from Berlin, but I haven't been in touch with him. I think this needs to happen in a greater area, but the primary focus, as I see it, is Montpelier right now, and not at the 10,000-foot level, at the 6-foot level for the next 3 months until winter hits, and see what we can get done. But ask that the task force come back with their own recommended scope, and I think it may even be as specific as writing a plan.
Thank you. So what would you like to do regarding the charge? Is there a motion regarding the charge of this group? Lauren?
Well, so I'm just wondering, so we have the concept in the first bullet about developing short-term ideas and/or solutions. I'm wondering if there's any, I mean, not to overly wordsmith, because I agree that the committee should figure out exactly how this plays out. But I'm just like, if we're looking for things that we want to get done for this winter, like, is there any just more specificity or timeliness? I mean, short-term could mean different things to different people. So if we're really looking for, are there solutions we need to get in place for this winter? Things like we knew the shelter closed when it was still really cold out this year. Things like that we'd want to get in place sooner rather than later if they're going to need funding and other things. So just I don't know if we need any clarification or just having this conversation is enough to be like, we're looking for implementation and not just short-term ideas. Maybe it's fine.
No, I mean, yeah, Dawn.
I guess I'm hoping within their discussion, if there are things they can implement short-term or come to us to help, then that's what will come before us. I feel very comfortable making a motion that we adopt this as the initial charge to be revisited in 3 months when we get their report, but that this works for me for right now. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just works.
Glenn.
Donna more or less took my points.
Second it.
All right, was that a motion? Sorry.
Yeah, that was a
Then
motion.
second.
Okay.
Pass some copies of that around?
I don't know if,
We
yeah,
don't
we
have
can make some
copies.
copies, yeah.
You don't have copies?
No, it's all online. And
but
that's
Maybe
what,
just pass the first
we
line
can-
of it.
we've read it several times. The first line is creative, collaborative, developed, short-term ideas and/or solution to improve condition for the homeless. And the next gets into policy recommendations and concrete ideas for long-term structural and system improvements that the city could implement, along with a preliminary budget and timeline for the duration of work and implementation.
Okay, and so there's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Any comments from the, I'm sorry, Jack, and then we'll take any further comments from the public, yeah.
I think this is specific enough to give the task force some guidance while being broad enough to allow them to have the flexibility they need to move forward to pursue the effort in the way that their thinking and discussion leads them. So I support this the way it is.
Further discussion? Yeah, Don?
I just have a question for John. In looking at this, I was including in the overall, also the section that talks about ideas and recommendation, even though I didn't talk about that. The memo has both sections, and I was including that. Is that what my seconder also thought, Glenn?
Yes. Yes, that's what I
just-
intended.
Okay.
Your motion was fairly broad, so I
Okay.
think it was inclusive.
Okay, that was my intention.
Any further comments from the public about the charge of this group? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
My name is Seth Collins. I'm from Berlin, Vermont, and I would suggest that this task force work in the direction of implementing new construction projects of units that are that would be either rented for $400 per month, since that's quite reasonable, and also perhaps there would be something where either people could rent to own, or there'd be like condominiums where you would buy them outright, and then if you were to move out, you would then sell it back into the company. Because in my experience, in most individuals, it's the best way for them to settle down if they have a place that they either own themselves, or if they're renting, that's safe and secure and affordable. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just going to echo the points.
Oh,
that
if you would
everyone
come up and use the microphone so that people who are viewing at home can also hear you. And also if you would say your name and where you live.
I'm Bob Buchanan. I'm a professor at Goddard. I have worked at Good Samaritan Home, and I'll just echo the comments everyone else has offered, which is our timeline is not the timeline of the folks on the streets. They're on a much shorter, much more precarious, much more vulnerable timeline. So the sooner we can work on this and identify short-term measures that will significantly improve the difficult situation so many people are in this fall, the better.
Great, thank you. Okay, so there has been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, great, thank you. And so now on to appointments to this committee. So if there is anyone here who had put their name in to be considered to be officially appointed to this committee, though I want to Just remind people that these will be open meetings, so regardless of whether or not you're appointed particularly to it, then everyone is welcome. But nonetheless, if you are here and want to introduce yourself and tell us about your interest in serving on this committee.
I got you, Zach. So my interest, I'm Zach Hughes, Montpelier, Prospect neighborhood. My interest is because I'm out there every day when I can be, besides my other job, and I practically live this stuff. So I have a lot of resource and connection out there, and I have the ability to talk with with everybody out there at a unique level. So I'm, I feel I'm uniquely suited for this. Plus, I'm not representing any interest at all, but the cities and the city councils and so on, citizens of Montpelier mostly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Erica Rail, Vermont Center for Independent Living. Even though I'm representing an organization, I'm actually representing people with disabilities and the deaf. I'm actually a person with a disability, and I really want to include not only people that have mental health conditions, but people with other disabilities, mobility, cognitive, people that are deaf. And I'm also been working as an advocate for people with disabilities for 15 years. So like everybody else, I provide a unique set of skills to this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Dawn Little. I'm a Montpelier resident, and for the last 4 years, I've been doing street outreach in Washington County, primarily in Montpelier, Berlin, and Barrie. I've worked a little bit with Sergeant Bissett and with Zach and a number of the agencies in the area. I do referrals, I do peer counseling, I get donations and pass out donations. I've been trying to identify some of the gaps in services, working primarily with people who have fallen through the gaps in the existing services, like people with trauma or mental health issues, people with addictions, people who are unable to get over most of the hurdles that are out there in accessing the services that are currently available. So I would really like to be involved with the task force. As Zach said, I think I have the ability to communicate with people who have perhaps given up on accessing traditional services. I have the time to put in reaching them. So I'd really like to do that. And I think it's really, was it Peter who was talking about communication between existing services and the people who need them? And that's a very serious issue. And that's one of my primary goals, so I would love to be part of that. Thank you.
Could you say your name again?
Dawn Little.
Dawn. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know whether you have my name or not, because I just heard about this a short time ago.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi. Ronna Gable. I'm actually a resident of Plainfield. Oh, sorry. I didn't want to shout. Is that better?
Tilt it up.
Is this okay?
Yes.
Okay. Ronna Gable. I work in Montpelier in community mental health. I am not here representing any organization. I'm here as a concerned citizen. I'm interested in identifying and filling gaps in services, which are profoundly evident in this area, and I think throughout the country, but profoundly evident here. I do street outreach in my spare time, and I would like to do what I can to help resolve this issue in a timely fashion. I'm primarily concerned with warming shelters, cooling shelters. Safe access to restrooms is a huge, I know that I have difficulty downtown sometimes as someone with money in my wallet finding a restroom. Safe access to showers, laundry, and a housing first model I would love to see, but in the immediate future I would just like to help do whatever I can in a very solution-oriented, timely fashion. So, thank you. there are also a lot of people who whose lived experience qualifies them, and I am absolutely fine with not being nominated as well, because I will continue to do what I do, and it's, you know, I have no attachment one way or the other, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Bob Buchanan back again. I live in Marshfield. I work in Plainfield. I'm just here really as a citizen. I've worked at Good Samaritan Home and may again. I teach at Goddard. I think about these issues all the time. I echo everything that Rana just said. She, in particular, that there are significant services that we do not have available to folks. And also, if folks with lived experience want to be on the committee, I'm happy to step away from that as well.
Great, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Goddard. I'm a resident of Berlin. I work here in Montpelier. I'm interested in, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to look at my application and to allow me to speak briefly about this. But so I'm interested in serving on the task force primarily because what we're really talking about here is human suffering and people that are not able to have basic needs met, being shelter. So I really want to be part of the conversation, part of the dialogue. I live very close to Montpelier, just outside the town line. So I would really appreciate the opportunity to try to work on this issue directly as a member of this task force, and thank you for considering all the applications and mine as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Since he isn't here, this is Yvonne Bird from the Community Justice Center. He isn't here, but a man named Travis Hill has come to see me twice in the last couple of weeks. You might remember I introduced him to you 2 weeks ago when he was here. And he has someone who has experienced homelessness, who's utilized the shelter at the Bethany Church, who has a strong connection with Another Way and folks on the street, and he would really like to be appointed to the committee.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I think you've already heard from me enough. I have expressed some mild concern about in the context that it is inclusive and open meetings, how many people are going to really be required to get a quorum, and how many workhorses are going to really get the work done. I'm concerned about expanding it to 14, 15 people from the context of just operational logistics. It's up to y'all to decide whether you're going to actually reach out and ask Sergeant Bissett to ask Berry City and Berlin to join in these processes. I think they could learn a lot and begin to form their own task force based on this model. I believe I don't know all the people that have applied, so I have made my own short list as you received earlier, and I welcome participation by, any number of people, and it's more of a logistical thing of effective management of a quorum in minutes and delegation to get the requirement of data collection. I'm not sure who's got all that data. I'm hoping city staff has some of it already. But if you have any questions for me.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone else here from that list? Okay, So I believe at the last meeting, we established that, that there were, what, 8 seats, or was it 9? I forget. I think it was,
Bill said I
Between-
said 8 last time.
yeah, I
so,
thought it was,
uh,
yeah. Okay, so, fair enough. Let's, I think we probably need to,
Plus a council member, or is? So we get the council member? I mean, I'm not. there's no
I think we
requirement.
could. And also, I mean, we're creating this from scratch right now, so other comments. Peter, do you have something to add?
Yeah, because I hear you, Peter Kalman, I hear you talking about the numbers, and the point about quorum and is very important. I was on the, I can't even remember the name, the Social and Economic Responsibility Committee, and it's really important, first of all, to have an odd number, I think. And are you counting a member of the council in that number? Because it wasn't clear in our committee whether or not that person was counted.
So, my understanding is that it would be 8 with a council member.
Who would be a voting member?
Who would be a voting member? Yes.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Bill's
We can-
looking skeptical.
No.
Oh, I wasn't clear whether you meant 8 plus a council member to make it 9? or-
Yes.
Yes, that's what you meant.
Yes, that's.
Yes, okay. And will there be a staff person who will support?
Most likely, yes.
Okay, because that's critical. Okay, that's all I want to say.
Perfect. Thank you.
Peter, I should just say, in general, there's all these committees that the city has that have council representatives on the committee, and as a general proposition, if a member of the council is part of that committee, then they're fully part of the committee, including being a voting member.
Is it as brief? Yeah.
Yeah, very brief.
Yeah.
I did have a discussion with Councilor Hurl regarding that. I think that, especially as I've watched CVPSA, I believe that, one, the availability of the available time of the volunteer council members has been a challenge, especially leading up to this appointment. I would recommend that you put 2 counselors on it, but in non-voting positions. That way they can come and go as they please, and they don't count towards the quorum. And, but they also don't, well, I believe that there's merit to having a tight team of workhorses to get this job done. And if counselors are spread too thin on other projects, that would dilute that effort.
Thank you. Okay, so we would be discussing this in executive session, so is there a motion to go into executive session? Don, or Glenn?
Before that, one other point that I feel like we might want to mention is that in earlier conversations about this, we had expected to get a member of this task force recommended from the Montpelier Business Association, since, as I recall, the whole thing came up to some extent from that source. Has there been any more recent communications
So
from them?
I understand that they are planning to nominate someone. I don't know that they have actually selected the person yet. Could be your ninth member.
We're gonna keep going.
Just Jen from Rebel Heart did offer to participate. She wasn't nominated by the Business Association.
Any further things that we need to discuss? Okay, is there a motion?
Pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313A, sub 3, I move that we enter into executive session to discuss the appointment of public officer or officers.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll be back hopefully soon. Yeah. Okay, is there a motion to come out of executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? All right, is there a motion regarding the appointments?
I move that we appoint to the Homelessness Task Force the following people: Travis Hill, Erica Reel, Don Little, Ken Russell, Zach Hughes, Will Eberly, and Stephen Whitaker.
Second.
So further discussion. Before we go too much further on this, I just want to point out that one of the factors in here for us was the residency of people who were applying for it, and even though a number of people who were not appointed don't live in Montpelier but have some connection either through work or whatnot, would absolutely invite you all to continue to pay attention to the notices, the warnings for these meetings, and still certainly invite you to come participate in these discussions. That's going to be really important. So any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you. And, yes, Donna.
I would like to make a motion to appoint Glenn as a council representative on this committee.
Second.
Glenn, how do you feel about that? Are you willing to
I think
serve?
it's great. I'd love to serve, and I also really appreciate how much interest there's been on this. I think it's one of the largest and fastest group of applicants that I've seen, and I look forward to working hard on this committee if I get voted on.
All right, all in favor, or actually, further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Thank you all, and thank you for the work that you're going to do. I'm looking forward to that report in about 3 months. So thank you all.
And in terms of, Yvonne Bird is going to arrange for the first meeting, so she'll be reaching out to people.
Okay. It is 8 o'clock. Actually, let's keep going for now, and if we need to take a break, we certainly can. Okay, so the Berry Street, Main Street corridor discussion. Yes, welcome. Hi.
Hello.
So, do you want to introduce sort of what we've been looking at so far today, or for this item? Yeah.
Yeah, before we started, I just wanted to announce that we heard just this morning that we are awarded a grant to construct sidewalk on Granite Street. So I know a lot of people were interested in that connection, so something to look forward to next summer. And actually, it's through the same program that funded this study, so there's a segue. In April, the council received a presentation on the draft scoping study. Since that time, VTrans has reviewed and commented on that study, on that draft. Their comments and questions have been addressed. We also held 2 public outreach meetings. I want to thank the library and the senior center for hosting those. I think they were very well attended. Saw some council members there. The mayor did a great job of leading those. Sophie did a great job of presenting. It really, we get a lot of good feedback, and I think it really spurred some conversation about alternative transportation accommodations over parking accommodations, and people's experience out on the corridor now, people's past experiences with roundabouts and signals and different bike facilities. So yeah, it was very very well attended, very very good conversations to have, and that's so I guess kind of why we're here this evening, to have those conversations now at the council level. Those meetings were recorded, they were available online, Maybe you've saw some things, heard some things that you wanted to talk further about. Maybe you've heard some things from your constituents outside of those meetings that you wanted to bring up. Staff has presented some recommendations. I can just quickly go through those. We kind of divided them up into Berry Street recommendations, intersection recommendations, and Main Street bike facility recommendations. For the Berry Street recommendation, staff would recommend to move forward with the short-term implementation of a two-way bicycle bike track, I think you call it, on the south side of the street, working towards a long-term goal of constructing an actual extension of the shared use path on that same side, on the south side. For the intersection treatments, staff, the preferred alternative with staff is the M1 alternative, and that would be the signalization of the corridor with the implementation of adaptive technology to adjust the signals in real time, as well as the exclusive PED phases, which all of our existing signals have now, stopping all traffic for pedestrians. The other alternative, so the M1 alternative is the signalization of the corridor. We do recognize that the roundabout option at School Street doesn't have the constraints that some of the other locations do in terms of constructing roundabouts. I think we made the comment of potentially doing some tweaks. It does queue through that intersection sometimes. It's minimal. Maybe there's some tweaks of the existing signal infrastructure at the State Street that can be done to minimize that. I don't think it can remove it completely, but minimize it. The Main Street bike facility recommendation would be implementing the unprotected lanes with the buffers and working towards the protected lanes. And again, and with the Main Street bike facility recommendation and the Berry Street recommendation, we've also noted that the parking removal to accommodate those is a separate process, and ultimately the council would see that ordinance change separate from this scoping study.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's all I have.
Super, thank you. So I'd love to start with if there's any questions or comments from council, and then hear from the public on this. The way that I'm thinking about it, just so you all are aware, is it feels like there are at least 6 different places or items on which we need to make a decision. Intersection of Berry and Main Street, intersection of State and Main. What should be the bike pen amenities on Berry Street, the School and Main Street intersection, and then the bike ped amenities on Main Street. Is that a fair summation? I mean, so the M1 suggestion had multiple parts or intersections as a part of it, so I'm sort of breaking those out a little bit. The other thing that I want to just make a note of is that this is a really interesting agenda item, I would say, because the staff and consultants have recommended one course of action, and the MTIC has basically recommended a different course of action. And so this is it's an interesting conundrum. So mostly because there's that conflict, I would love to just see where people are at this evening and see if there's general consensus about anything. And then it seems like we should probably, there may be items that we just need to talk more about. Because some of these items, it feels like some of these are too big a decision to just move forward, if there's not substantial agreement. I guess I'll just say that. Or I'd prefer, anyway, for there to be a substantial agreement. I don't know if we're going to get there, but at least I'd like to start with just seeing where people are at. So first thing, any questions or comments comments on any of this? Connor, then Glenn.
So the removal of parking would need to be approved separately, but aren't they completely like intertwined at the same time, some of these plans?
Yeah, we would, I think what we would do is sort of approve what our vision is for moving forward, and then the actual implementation would require ordinance changes regarding where parking was, or how parking is allotted through the town. Does that make sense? So but even if we deal with the parking at a later time, we can still talk about, what's the vision, what's the big picture. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what we're after is the vision, especially when it comes to the parking. Something that staff can move forward with or committees can move forward with. Maybe that parking is approved to be removed through this, but it just may not be palatable right now. So then that would allow staff to move forward with, programs like the micro transit program, or a garage, something that takes that demand off the on-street parking. So I agree, that's what we're looking for, is kind of the vision right now.
Go ahead.
I have a few questions, and I'm totally willing to be interrupted with other questions. But kind of on the parking question, one of the things that I heard come up at the public hearing, the one that I managed to get to, was a kind of general question about bike paths on streets and whether it was practical to consider seasonal bike paths and replacing parking when fewer people are likely to be biking. Has DPW talked internally at all about that possibility, or do you have any suggestions in that direction at this point?
It hasn't been addressed specifically with this scoping study. I know there's some issues with conflicts of markings and signage and things like that when you switch things over. But again, it hasn't been addressed specifically with this.
Okay. Next question. One of the ideas that is also potentially a little bit outside the scope of the current study, but something that I'm personally attached to is changing the Memorial Drive and Main Street intersection to a roundabout. And I'm curious to hear, so if we signalize the Barry and Main Street intersection, does that make it harder to, in the future, turn the Memorial Drive Main Street intersection into a roundabout? Is that something you can speculate on?
So that particular option was presented through the M2 alternative. That included the roundabouts at every intersection down Main Street. I think it was stated in there that, because I believe M3 or M4 was kind of what you're talking about, kind of a mixed matching of signals and roundabouts throughout the corridor. It was found to be not impossible, but it was found to be the least efficient way to do it, with the roundabouts at every intersection being basically the most efficient, and second would be the signals. So when you start mixing and matching, you're losing efficiency of the corridor, basically.
Can I jump in here? When you say efficiency, do you mean in terms of moving cars?
Yes.
Through the intersection?
Right,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And I think that actually answered the next question that I had. So thanks. And then on the adaptive signals, or no, I guess it's actually on the exclusive pedestrian phase for signalized intersections. do you have any data comparing the relative safety of that scenario versus, for example, roundabouts for pedestrians? And the reason I'm curious about this is the intersection that I use most, again, is the Memorial and Main Street intersection. I walk across it multiple times a day. The exclusive pedestrian phase is good. At the same time, probably about once a day, I get to my phase, my pedestrian phase, and a car pulls up in the turning lane and does not see the no turn signal come on, and comes fairly close to running into me as I step out into the street, because they're looking for oncoming traffic from the other direction. So yes, it's a protected pedestrian phase. It never feels perfectly safe to me, and I tend to feel safer in roundabouts where I'm only crossing one lane at a time, and I can always see, and everyone seems to be looking in the proper direction to see potential conflicts. I think I rambled through that question, but is there any data comparing those two safety levels for pedestrians?
So we actually, we had this kind of same conversation, not just with the pedestrian safety, but the pedestrian convenience as well, kind of bundling that together into roundabouts versus traffic signals. And you can read one study that says it kind of comes down to personal preference. You can read one study about one and then another about the other, and they contradict each other. So I think earlier on, when roundabouts were kind of just coming to the area, you could make a case for signals being safer, but now that they're kind of more prevalent around here and people know how to use them more, they really even out. And the same thing with convenience. With a roundabout, you're going a little bit off your path and then coming back, instead of with a traffic signal. Yes, you have to wait for your turn to go, and there's some patience involved with that, but you have kind of a straight line of where you're going. So really, I think they kind of cancel each other out. And again, it's more personal preference than anything. Yeah.
Just to add to that, it cancels itself out unless you're visually impaired. Then the traffic signals are safer from that perspective, because there is a exclusive phase. People are obligated to stop, whereas in a roundabout, it's a yield situation. So people slow down, yes, but not necessarily always stop. So in that sense, that is another conversation.
I guess the other thing where the pedestrian safety comes into play is where you start to kind of commingle at the roundabouts if bikes need to kind of commingle with pedestrians to get out of the roundabout and maneuver around it. It also presents a safety factor for pedestrians.
Was that it? That's it. Okay, Donna.
I know I'm redundant, but yes, I want roundabouts, and you really do need either all roundabouts or all light signals. And I understand and know that it was a hard decision even for the staff to look at. But even beyond that, I would like to discuss the shared path that we have now that we're connecting, that comes down past the railroad tracks and hits Berry at the recreation building, comes back out to Berry Street. And to me, it's a shared path that bikes and pedestrians are using. And so I would like to make sure that it continues with a shared path usage down the south side of Berry Street, and then goes across that intersection of Berry and Main and joins the other shared path. Now, temporarily, you've put here a two-way bike. You talked about just temporarily putting something in, so the pedestrians would stay up on the sidewalk on Berry Street, but below them would be 2 lanes for bikes. And that's okay temporarily, but what I don't see here is saying it's going to go back long-term to a shared path, because it's only a small section of Berry Street. And to me, it's more confusing when you change it than if you just continue the same shared youth path that pedestrians and bikes use. Is that the intention?
Yeah,
It's just
so
not
that-
stated
yep.
here.
No, it was, addressed in the recommendations. Alternative B1, a shared use path as the long-term goal for the Berry Street connection. The B2 is the, like you mentioned, the short-term two-way bikeway, and then the B1 alternative
Could you
is that shared.
take me what section, because they're not numbered. So I have
Staff recommendations.
right up top, you have a B2, but that talks about,
And then next
Two
line
ways.
down, it talks about the B1 alternative.
this doesn't describe it, okay. A little confusing to take the report we had before with lots of lanes and diagrams and just have the narrative, but thank you. And that was also part of it, is if indeed we accept this, then staff is going to start moving on this. It isn't a matter of us accepting the report and then considering policies. This becomes policy, is that correct?
So the way these usually kind of work out is at the end of the report, there is a municipal recommendation or recommendations. That is what staff would pursue.
Okay.
I had a conversation with VTrans about potential next steps. Typically, you take a report like this and you have a number of alternatives and you narrow it down to one, and then you would go apply for design and construction funding for that alternative. So ultimately, ideally, that's what we're after.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we know when we vote for it, that's what we're setting a policy.
Right.
Okay, so just two more other things. At one of the public hearings, seasonal biking came up, at the other it didn't. And again, I feel if we're trying to get bikes out there, should have the paths there, they should be theirs, year-round. And that's the way we expand more bikes and less cars. And now on School Street, I'm really disappointed not to have a roundabout there, but I really understand it won't work with the lights. Will the construction make it narrower? Right now, we talked about it. One thing the roundabout would do at School in Maine would make the whole intersection smaller. So will the pedestrians still have to walk this long distance so that the light for pedestrians will be longer?
I think there's some opportunities there, either with the roundabout option or the signal option, to shorten those, create some larger
Even with the
bump outs.
signal, you would shorten it?
I think there's some opportunities there to do
Okay,
that.
because that was one of the issues, and I didn't see it addressed here, but.
Yeah, and I don't think, it's not necessarily, at least, I'm just speaking for staff's
Mhm.
position, that a roundabout won't work there.
You list lights
There
for
are
it.
there are less impacts there, and I
Yeah.
think we listed that as part of the recommendations. Is it doesn't have the constraints that the other locations have. There is some queuing that happens through the intersections, but it's minimal compared to some of the other ones.
Okay, I'm in the queue a lot, way down to the other roundabout.
Thank you. I want to follow up on some of the questions you asked. So you were in favor of a shared use path on the south side of Berry Street, but also roundabouts. And my understanding was that those two things, that there was no plan that included both of those things. Like if we were going to have the shared use path on the south side of Berry Street, that would necessitate signalization at Berry and Main, unless I'm wrong, and I'm happy to be
No.
wrong.
Well,
Yeah,
there was
yes.
a diagram that wasn't shown at the two public hearings you attended that was shown at the other public hearings, and it allowed for the shared use path to come down Berry on south side, but it would make the bikes and pedestrians who are together go across Berry Street. So they'd have one more street crossing. And the consultants didn't like that. They didn't present it at the hearings you had.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you say that again? It would cross. So wouldn't that be on the north side of Berry Street?
So
Then?
you're on the south side.
Yeah, of Berry Street.
So you're by the dry cleaners when you
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah.
Pedestrians and bikes get there together.
Yeah.
You'd have to cross Berry Street and then
And Main.
cross Main
And
and
then-
join the path.
Well, and then you'd also have to cross the access road to behind.
Right,
Oberschartz.
right. So
So
it gives
you end up with you end up
three.
with three
One more
crossings.
crossing.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah, go, yeah. Two more crossings.
Right, two more crossings.
Because behind Oberschartz.
And that's with the mini roundabout option. With the full roundabout option at that intersection, you could still reduce it to one crossing.
Yeah.
but because of the location of the railroad tracks, you can't have a crossing on a railroad track, so it creates those extra crossings.
So that is possible to do a south side of Berry
With a
Street?
full roundabout, it is possible to continue along the south side and only have that one crossing.
Only have one, and only have one crossing, but we could have the south side of Berry Street mostly, and then cross Berry, cross Main, cross the Aubuchon's, I don't want to call it that, but next to the railroad, but,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's helpful. Other comments or questions? Oh, Connor, did you have something to add? Jack?
I do have a couple. I'm with this regard to the School Street intersection. I still think the roundabout is a preferable option to signals. I'm not really sure I understand why that's not seen as a feasible option. Since it's beyond, there are no signals beyond that, so it's not going to interfere with outer traffic flow. Am I missing something?
No, I mean, I think we stated that where it's, the signal, but the roundabout option, like I said, it doesn't present those efficiency constraints. It doesn't present those right-of-way constraints. So, we went with the overall M1 alternative, which signalizes that intersection, but I think it's staff's feeling that if a roundabout were to go in there, it would have minimal impacts on those.
I also really find the idea of of having a roundabout intersection at Memorial Drive to be very appealing, and I envision this kind of like I know some people who drive in that intersection find it threatening, but I envision it like the roundabout on the north end of Brattleboro, right off exit 3 from the interstate. And although there's a lot of traffic that goes through, I think it moves traffic through very quickly and efficiently. The one question that has always been in my mind with regard to doing turning that into a roundabout is, how do we get there from here, given the fact that there's so much traffic that goes through that intersection every day? I wonder if you have some thoughts about that. How do we turn that intersection into a roundabout, and what happens to all that traffic?
Want to comment?
We all go on vacation.
I guess I'm still a little stumped on the actual on the question. Constructability wise, or
yeah, construction. What's happening to the traffic while that intersection isn't open to traffic because we're building a roundabout in that spot?
That was something that was brought up amongst staff as well, not just with that intersection, but roundabouts in general. And even getting past the building of it, which is a major step, but just the maintaining of them, if you go to pave it, if you go to even just paint markings, if you have a water line break underneath it. The roundabouts do pose some difficulties because you only have that one lane. So having adjacent streets to detour traffic to would be an option. You can usually work within a roundabout and keep one side open so you don't have to detour both or all approaches. It's basically, it comes down to just one approach that you have to detour onto a side road or an adjacent street.
Another issue that isn't addressed that I've had in my own mind as an issue for the Main and State intersection, I've heard other people mention it, is that northbound traffic that who wants to turn left onto Langdon Street is often blocked because southbound traffic on Main Street pull up into across Langdon Street and block Langdon Street. And that happens every day, and it forces traffic back into the State Street intersection. Would we need to, if we want to stop that, would we need to adopt an ordinance that says you're not allowed to stop in that intersection, or could we do pavement markings or something like you see in other places where they've got these crisscross markings to say don't stop here? Because I think that no matter what we're doing with the intersections, that is going to continue to be a serious problem unless we address it.
So if you, when it gets light out, if you look out the front door, we just recently did that type of marking in front of the fire station.
I just noticed that today.
Yeah, so it could be something similar to that. And I don't believe it is an ordinance in our books. It's sort of at the discretion of staff to place that.
But if a southbound driver pulls up and blocks Langdon Street, are they violating an ordinance now, or would we need to adopt an ordinance to make it so that can be enforced and people can be ticketed for doing that?
Yep.
You think they're already violating some ordinance?
They may be violating state statute. If they are, and they are cited for it, unfortunately, that money doesn't come to the city, it goes to the state. So adopting a local ordinance to support that would probably make some sense.
Okay. I'd be interested in pursuing that. I realize this is somewhat beyond the scope, but the other terrible intersection that we have downtown is the Elm Street and State Street intersection. And I noticed one of the comments from the Department of Transportation is, how come you're not talking about addressing that at all? I think we really should be. That might be the next.
Well, I think there's some
phase.
hope that the State Street streetscape plan and master plan could maybe address some fixes at that intersection. It's within the scope of that study.
And if I'm being redundant, let me know, but with regard to the School Street roundabout, are you saying that even if we adopt the plan the way it is, that leaves us open the opportunity to do the School Street roundabout, or should we vote to change something in this to make that the option?
I would vote to change if you wanted the School Street. I would
Okay.
pull that out and do a separate.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any further comments just initially here? I'd love to come back for more discussion about this. But I'd also love to hear from the public on this as well. So yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, Joe Castellano, and I have to say I'm in favor of the staff recommendations for the M1, the signalized intersections, and I like the idea of the seasonal bike path on the south side of Berry Street. I think that bike usage during the winter is not as robust as during the summer, and I think it could free up some parking or just provide better sight lines through the winter, when visibility is not so good. And one of the reasons why I'm in favor of the signalized intersections as opposed to the roundabouts is it's challenging as it is right now, just getting out of that Shaw's parking lot. And as winter's coming and approaching and it's dark, just trying to turn left out of that lot, I think the traffic volume is going to increase, or the speeds might increase with the roundabout, making it more difficult to get out of the Shaw's parking lot. And the same reason for the School Street, the reason why I never park on those diagonal parking spots in front of the library is I'm always afraid if I'm next to a big F-150 pickup, I can't see, and I might run into somebody. So I'm just always, just from a safety perspective, that's the concern I have, because some people can come into a roundabout and just, you know, although it may be a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, some people will not adhere to that. So that's my concern, just from a safety perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve Whitaker. A couple of comments. I think we need to be very careful here, because one of the key qualities of our experiences in this town, our smallest capital city, is its walkability, and adding signalization to multiple new intersections is going to put a big dent in that perception, both locals and tourists. That's a magic, it's an intangible of how nice our town is. I'll note that I'm going to haphazardly vote for the School Street roundabout. I'm going to vote against moving the crosswalk, as it didn't get any mention here, but there's talk of moving the crosswalk from the down home to City Center over to the Hazen Place, which is basically the back entrance alley between Bethany Church and the AT&T store. That doesn't work from a traffic flow, from a from a pedestrian flow point of view. And I think that crosswalk where it is can actually help contribute to the preservation of the blocking, trying to prevent blocking of the Langdon Street. It could be that crosswalk could be one of the boundaries of the crisscross box that protects the left turn lane from northbound traffic onto Langdon. I'm not sufficiently schooled in the roundabout options for Memorial Drive, but that is the preferred alternative. I do want to make a comment about the crosswalks. We've got one crosswalk there that talks to you, and the flashing lights, I'm glad those don't exist at our other crosswalks down at school and Langdon, but the flashing, I've had conversations with the folks who speak Hindi or Kannada, Hindu dialect. We got a whole lot more people than the Spanish. I don't know who chose the languages for that crosswalk, but maybe we don't need any talking crosswalks. I'd also remind you to consider the idea that was put on the table. I've reached out to that architect, that blind architect, who did the 60 Minutes piece. As we design our intersections and our sidewalks, if we had a sensitivity that could really benefit us going forward as we replace our sidewalks incrementally with navigation supporting the sight impaired. So just be really careful with this. I hope we're not jumping off a cliff tonight with irreversible decisions.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just in regards to the seasonal,
Yes, sir.
I know Donna mentioned it. And,
It's okay. Just hang on one second. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'll be very quick, but my name is Seth Collins. I live in Berlin, Vermont, and I walk a lot, and I find it very difficult to cross roundabouts directly as if they were, cutting directly through them. So I would recommend, roundabouts are fine, they increase traffic flow, but I would recommend that crosswalks to be placed between them. So say you have a roundabout here, and the crosswalk is there, then the traffic, because it would average out, because instead of the traffic stopping at the intersections, they're now roundabouts, and the traffic would then stop between them. So thank you.
Thank you.
I forgot one more important point. This morning I witnessed and photographed a semi-truck, a through truck coming down Main Street, is apparently using, it's probably illegal, using Loomis as a shortcut, probably to avoid the Main Street roundabout. Coming down Loomis, turning right on School, turning left onto Main. But we have to be careful if we do have these tractor trailers coming through, if they're going to start violating and running on residential streets in order to avoid the roundabouts. That has to be taken into the calculation.
Thank you. Any further comments from the public?
Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add?
just in regards to the seasonal.
Do you have anything you want to add?
The seasonal aspect of it, you know, it's not mentioned in here, but if that is something that the council would like staff to keep in mind as these design alternatives are being, going through the process, it would just be something I would recommend adding to your recommendation, whether you'd like to pursue seasonal or full-time.
So I'm gonna go ahead and just say what I'm thinking about all of this, and so I'm gonna be again a little methodical about this, starting with well, really with the staff recommendation. I'm in support of signalizing the corridor generally, and part of that is it's really for a couple of reasons. One is that I agree that our walkability as a town is high priority, and I worry that roundabouts are not as pedestrian friendly as you know, as we are accustomed to now in terms of getting around town, and that there is a real issue there with the sight impaired. The other reason is the sort of the flip side of that too is that it is not necessarily a priority for me to move cars more quickly. I mean, I know that would be nice, but as a community, that's not my highest priority. My highest priority is the walkability of the city. The second reason is that if we're going to do roundabouts throughout, I'm very much, I'm speaking for myself here and I could be outvoted, but I'm very much opposed to a roundabout at the intersection of State and Main because of the traffic implications for people coming down East State Street wanting to turn left. There was no way to do that without significant detours, and I think that would be very problematic for some of the side streets that would end up seeing much more traffic, and that would actually exacerbate the problem on Elm Street as well, because that's actually part of the one of the solutions was to get people actually around to Elm Street to end up coming back around to Main from East State, which is that I think that would be very cumbersome. Part of me would like to support some kind of a hybrid, only maybe that's not terribly efficient, but maybe if efficiency of cars is not my highest priority anyway. But there it is. And then the other factor there, I'm forgetting my thought there, so I'm gonna keep going. So in terms of so in terms of the hybrid sort of model, it did sound to me like a roundabout at School Street and Main Street would be possible and not have tons of impact. So I would support that. In part, I also want to favor the roundabout at Memorial and Main Street. That seems somehow intuitive to me, and I know that that's a place, Glenn, where you cross often, and so I don't know how that works, but it also feels slightly further away from downtown. So is that where it'd be okay to have cars moving more quickly? I don't know. Anyway, I would be interested in that, and I wonder if that makes a difference because it's on the end. In terms of State and Main, I guess that I'm being redundant here. Interested in signalizing it. One of the highest priorities that I have is keeping the the shared use path on the south side of Berry Street, regardless of whether it's a roundabout or a signal at Berry Street and Main Street. Having that on the south side of Berry Street, I think, makes the most sense, particularly for parking, as well as, it'd be great if we could have one crossing across Main Street there. But again, regardless of what happens with the intersection, if we could keep that on the south side, that'd be wonderful. The bike ped facilities, or really the bike facilities on Main Street, I feel like I need to dig into that more. I feel like I need, like, we've had almost no conversation about what should be happening with bicyclists on Main Street, and so I would not feel comfortable making a very clear decision about what we do there. I mean, I would love to dig into the report further and ask some more questions, but for whatever reason, that particular aspect is, in my mind, low on the priority list of like what happens with these other intersections. So maybe that's just, we've just paid less attention to that aspect of it. Anyway, I'd like to revisit that at some point. I do favor moving the crosswalk from Langdon Street to Hazen Place just to get a little separation there. Don't have strong feelings about that. I'm open to conversation about that. Anyway, I guess I'll say that generally speaking. This is where I'm at right now, and I would love to have more dialogue and just hear from others as to where you're at. And I don't anticipate necessarily having a vote tonight. We could, but I just want to put it out there that we don't have to, because these are big decisions. And if there's something that we all feel comfortable with on some aspect of it, then great, let's do it. But otherwise, I want to make sure that you all know that I'm in a position where I'm still willing to talk. Maybe these aren't the right solutions. I want to be open to discussion. Other thoughts? Sorry, thank you for entertaining me and letting me first. But also, Tom, you haven't spoken yet. Would you like to? Sure. Is that okay, Donna?
Yeah. I just feel like there's been a lot said about roundabouts not being safe for pedestrians, and that's just not true. And there's just one city in Carmel, Indiana, who's called the USA Roundabout City. It has 100 roundabouts. Its population is 89,000, and they have right here, because of their aesthetics and their ability to make it easier for pedestrian and bicyclists to navigate in, they have changed out all their intersections that used to be lights. So, and I'll get some more data on that, but there are other cities who've done this because it is safer, it is more attractive, it does slow down traffic, and anyway, so I just felt that was a misnomer.
Fair enough. One of the things that would be helpful for me, Donna, is this idea about or I think it was brought up by Seth. What's the possibility of combining roundabouts with some kind of crosswalk?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't
Anyway,
distinguish.
I don't know, and maybe that's a question for you all. What does that possibility look like? Okay, Tom.
Are you commenting as a resident or?
Oh.
Not yet.
Well, I'm not the public works director anymore, and I'm not your boss. But I'm not a resident either. That's right. But I still work here. If you'd like to hear from me,
We'd
I'll
certainly
offer some
like to
few
hear
comments.
from you, please.
So the point about the roundabout pedestrian safety, I agree with you, Donna. There's a lot of beneficial attributes.
Can you get closer to the mic, Tom?
To roundabouts. So I think we've shown that at the School and Main intersection, particularly with younger kids and younger adults using that intersection frequently, that you do only have to look in one direction.
Do you
and
mean
it is
spring and
helpful.
Main?
What's spring and Main?
Spring
What
and
did
Main,
I
not
say?
School. Okay.
So yes, so there are some beneficial parts or attributes to pedestrian safety, and as far as the visually impaired, there is for a 2-lane roundabout, they recommend using what's called a Hawks system, which is a signalized roundabout crossing, so that there's a pedestrian actuated signal at the crossing. But even with that, for visually impaired, there are systems you can use for locator tones, and then there's a lot of training for helping visually impaired navigate roundabouts. They don't have the audible cues to locate the corners. That's all true, but there are other methods and systems to use for that. So I think if you don't mind, I just heard some things, and I just wanted to clarify or add some thoughts on all of them. One on just some clarity on the School and Main roundabout idea, what We believe that is a realistic option, potentially a beneficial option. The issue there is kind of, though, to address some of the queuing and some of the issues that might cause a roundabout to fail, and when they fail completely. When queues of traffic back up through a roundabout, the side streets can't move, nothing moves really. So how do you address that? So that's why the looking at adaptive signal technology is to detect when that queue is developing and then try to flush the intersection out. But that doesn't really work well when there's a crosswalk stuck in there, or there's a truck maneuvering, or somebody's backing out of a parking space. So you can't totally overcome all of that. But I think what we were looking at is maybe looking at it further study. You talk about the obstruction of the Langdon Street intersection. Our conventional solution to a lot of these issues was to add more lanes. You can't enter the right turn lane in front of the TD Bank because there's angle parking in there. We could shorten that queue considerably if you double capacity. 2 lanes side by side, a right turn lane and a left and a through. And for going northbound, a separate lane left to turn, a holding lane to turn into Langdon, and then a separate through lane. But now we have 4 lanes on Main Street, and we're competing in this small piece of real estate for bike lanes and parking. So it's how you really allocate and break up this real estate, and what gives and what sacrifices are we making. State Street is a conversation we had years ago about how long the right turn lane should be on State, where the parklet is today. That lane was originally designed to go on the other side of the bridge. Because of that lane not being long enough, and Sophie knows about calculating queue lengths and based on your right turn volume and the obstructions of the through lanes, can you use that lane? Well, your right turns you can't enter because it's so backed by the through traffic, obstructed by the through traffic. So that's really a deeper study. That's why we're not eliminating the school main roundabout. It's that how do we overcome those constraints so a roundabout can actually work there. And then the constructability side of things. It's a major transformation to turn a 4-way conventional intersection into a roundabout with the splitter lanes, the splitter islands, and the center island. Drainage patterns are completely different. Your roads slope differently. You have a center high point rather than gutters on the side. So it's a significant cost, and there's major constructability issues. It's very disruptive. Roundabouts are an absolute bear to construct, as you pointed out, Jack. It's doing them maybe in a quarter at a time while lanes are shifted and a lot of night work. I think if you were to select a roundabout at Main Memorial, Route 212 intersection, you probably, I wouldn't see it in my lifetime. That's probably 10 years at best you'd see that, because it really doesn't hit those warrants for congestion levels, traffic safety, pedestrian accidents. You really don't have any of those key indicators that says we need to advance this project for federal funding and state funding. So I just don't see that happening anytime soon, even if we could find a way to make it work. That intersection is optimized under the signal control, but if you look at the roundabout option, you have the river, a ledge, and a gas station constricting that. So you think about how a truck might service the gas station with the roundabout and the driveway stuck right in there. Well, roundabouts need driveways separated a long ways away from them, and need to be flat and need to be so that they are, I lost my train of thought. The other important thing that I don't know that's fully mentioned in this is that roundabouts need relatively balanced flow to work, because to enter one lane there needs to be an obstruction caused by another entering vehicle. So when it's balanced, somebody's always getting the right-of-way because somebody's waiting. So when you have side streets like School Street, I wonder if there's sufficient balanced flow there when one lane can actually dominate. And we see that sometimes at Route 2-302 intersection where there's, I think it's the morning commute, you'll see a long queue back out to Barry because there's very little traffic exiting Montpelier. They're all moving into Montpelier, so one side dominates heavily. So that's something that is very important on roundabout design considerations. So roundabouts have become an option. It's something that we need to consider when we're looking at signalized or any intersection treatment. Maybe a do-nothing, four-way stop, signalization, yield signs. All of those are all tools that you use, and they all look at them individually and what's the best for all of those pieces. Try to wrap it up because I know I'm going on a little bit. As far as the Langdon Street obstruction, I'm not sure we left it with a completely accurate impression on that. I'm not sure, Corey, you may be right that you can make an actual ordinance to enforce an obstructed intersection, but I wonder how that works because some people will anticipate the light remaining green and will continue to advance. The light turns, then cars kind of accordion effect. They all arrive at the intersection and suddenly I'm stuck in this dilemma zone and now I'm blocking the intersection. It may be something that you can't prevent. You'd like to leave a little room, and I think a lot of people do attempt to leave a little room there, and you'll actually see people back up to let somebody go through. So I'm not sure that I've always viewed those as an advisory pavement marking, and with the sign "Do not block intersections." It's so I question whether or not you can actually make that an ordinance. I think it would be helpful to make it more obvious to people that you are blocking an intersection. Try not to do it, but I don't know that you can. Just like a crosswalk, you might come to a crosswalk, you advance, you think you're going to keep going, the guy in front of you stops, slows for the intersection, now suddenly your vehicle's across the crosswalk. Didn't mean to, whoops, but can you actually be penalized for it? So that's what I had to say about the various options. I think there's some true merit to the possibility of a school main intersection that would change that possible to a roundabout. But I think about the width of these intersections too. We're aware of how long that is, but we also have to think about the truck turning movement requirements. While we tighten it up for other reasons, the truck may still need to make a turn there, and they need that very generous radius. And we frequently see a truck will run a tire up on a sidewalk. We know, whoops, we've got a radius problem here. That the last thing is Berry Street in Maine. Whatever is going to be done there, there's a railroad crossing that's becoming more and more active. We know it's going to be a signalized railroad crossing. We also know that there will be no gates, as last we heard through the diagnostics review. So with signalization, there's a system called preemption. When the train is arriving, the signal will preempt everything else, including pedestrian phase, because the train is arriving, and it will clear the intersection. That has not been designed. We haven't seen how that's going to work, whether the Memorial and Maine will be preempted and how that will actually work. That's a little complicated, but so it's entirely, it's possible that a roundabout would actually have to be signalized in order to accomplish that, which kind of defeats what you're looking at. But and how do you can't preempt a roundabout, so you have to preempt everything else so it flushes out. So it does make a lot of, make for a very complicated, whether it's signalized or roundabout, it's a highly complex intersection.
What does a signalized roundabout mean in this situation? Like lights and a roundabout?
No. I've never seen one. I've seen at the
We could do both.
It would prevent, it may only be that the signalization is the flashers that you're prevented to move forward. Whether or not with the roundabout, we propose that they do suggest we put gates. That may come through final design or through the design work, so.
So I have seen a signalized roundabout.
Oh, okay. All right.
So back when Winooski first put in their massive roundabout, it was actually signalized for pedestrians. And since they took that out because of the conflict, because of I guess the misinformation, the unexpectedness of going through a roundabout and seeing a signal. So that has since been removed, but that's how it was originally put in.
Thank you. And then, Joe, did you have something to add to that?
I too have seen a signalized roundabout. When we were living in Massachusetts, they decided to signalize the Drum Hill intersection, and it became a real challenge because you had traffic lights in all 4 directions, a lot of confusion. It was not a good design.
Wow, that's something.
That's all I will say.
Thank you. Thank you. Interesting. One of the things that, of course, occurred to me while you were talking there, Tom, was that again, before we make any decision about the big vision, I think we should be considering the costs of each of these. Thinking about like, well, okay, so if roundabouts cost quite a bit, what are we talking about in cost difference between these two potential plans or a hybrid or whatever? Other thoughts? Is there, particularly from councilors who we haven't heard from, and unless you don't want to speak at this point, which is fine too, but.
No, you have to speak. You have to speak.
No.
Go ahead, Connor.
I'll just say, I've never felt less prepared to vote and give a green light to something like this. It's so comprehensive. It's so many moving pieces on it. I mean, just the fact that, and you reference it, Mayor, it's like, the bike lanes on Main Street. We live in a city with snow on the ground 7 months a year, If there's seasonal alternatives, looking at the cost comparisons of this, I think we need to dig in a bit deeper on this, and I don't feel prepared to vote and give the okay tonight.
Okay. Glenn or Lauren? Lauren, go ahead.
I agree that it definitely seems like there's a lot of questions raised and maybe some further information on some of the, we might be able to check off a few, like keeping the signal at State and Main, for example. I don't know if there is agreement on the Berry Street two-way bikeway moving to the shared use path as the goal. If we might be able to go through and say, are there some that we can take off the list that we do agree on, whether or not we vote tonight, but just for the further questions we might have for staff and others. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of interest in the school in Maine still considering a roundabout, which I'm interested in learning more. At one point, and this might be a question, I thought I had heard that there was the possibility of like a temporary, so you don't do the full, you could maybe try it out and look at some of the issues like Tom raised of, is this actually going to work at that particular intersection with the traffic flow? So, and when, looking at the costs and stuff, if something like that could be part of the discussion as well, I'd be interested in thinking about that. So yeah, maybe there's a couple we could check off.
Yeah.
Find some general areas where we agree and where we have further questions and
Sure.
and narrow the list at least.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I'd also love to, even if it's not strictly a vote, just do like a little straw poll, just to see where we're at. And then regardless of the outcomes of that straw poll, to say, okay, so, it seems like most of us are favoring X or whatever. Can we just get a little reminder or further information about the potential costs of that? And then ask folks to come back with that information at least. But I think that's probably fair to just to do your suggestion, Lauren. Glenn, anything to add?
I feel semi-prepared, at least, to give my opinion on a bunch of these things. I think I've been clear. I like roundabouts in general. I am pretty persuaded by the arguments about the train crossing at the Barry Street intersection and the traffic diversion at the State Street intersection to think that we should move ahead for now and signalize Barry Street intersection. Also, I think anything will be better than what it is now, you know, basically, I think I would bet that we could get behind signalizing Barry Street intersection for now. I don't know. The other things that I'm reasonably satisfied with, as Lauren said, I think I would be down with the recommendations as stated for the shared use path down Barry Street on the south side, moving toward permanent. I like the idea of cross-hatching the Langdon Street entrance. I'd rather do it without an ordinance if we can get away with it, and see if that works, if we just cross-hatch it. I'm, like the mayor, I'm okay with shifting the crosswalk from Langdon Street to Hazen Place. And I would be in favor of a roundabout at the school and Main Street intersection, preferably by doing it as a painted temporary version at first, if we can get away with that there, and see what happens.
Okay. So I would love to go through these sort of one at a time, unless there's further comments. So I have actually 7 things on my list to go through, and if I'm missing anything, please let me know. So again, this is just a straw poll. It's not an official vote of anything, but just sort of where people are at. Thumbs up, I suppose, if you're up for a roundabout at School and Main.
I favor exploring it anyway. I've gone from saying I would do it tomorrow to saying to thinking that we should explore it.
We should explore it. Okay, so there's a lot of that's a yes. Okay, so a lot of favor for or interest anyway in that. Interest in gosh, I could frame it as like, would you rather have a roundabout or a signal at State and Main? How should we frame it? I'm going to frame it in Glenn's terms. So it's signal at State and Main. Okay. No. Okay. No. Okay. No. Okay.
You go ask the next one.
Then that's fair. Okay. So again, potentially looking into that. Interest in the shared use path or bicycle facilities, some flavor of being on the south side of Barry Street. If not, you can you can be in. I don't know. That's okay. Okay. So, interest in that. Moving the crosswalk from. Well, actually, I'm going to do this in a different order. Exploring possibilities of trying to prevent blocking of Langdon Street. That seems like something we could just do with paint, like we did in front of the fire station, and maybe we don't put a sign there. I don't know. Definitely interested in that. So I guess if that's a separate one, then now I have 8 items. So next one, moving the crosswalk from Langdon Street to Hazen Place.
I'm only a maybe on that.
Okay.
I think it's a really attractive idea because of have the potential for clearing traffic at the Main Street intersection. But I remember reading about a college campus where they built all the buildings, and then for a year or two they didn't put any sidewalks until they watched where the grass got beaten down. And figured, well, that's where the sidewalks need to be because that's where people are gonna walk. And I just question, I think that Langdon Street is where the people wanna cross, and moving the crosswalk won't necessarily change behavior.
Grass on all the sidewalks.
Other than we have jaywalkers just further down by the church, and maybe this will bring the jaywalkers to a middle
Cluster of
crosswalk.
jaywalkers.
Yeah, right. Fair. Great question. Okay. Roundabout at Memorial and Main Street. I'm gonna go a solid. I'm not sure. I know I said that I was interested in that before, but I'm not sure that I'm there.
Only a maybe.
Oh, okay, so we got like
I love
three maybes and 3 yeses. Or
You give us cost, and we're probably gonna get really,
Yeah,
really
right.
practical.
Okay.
Right, Tom?
It's interesting. I mean, I was super into that before, and then Tom maybe talked me out of it. Okay.
Who invited you?
Okay. I'm saving the exciting ones for last. I feel like I've heard multiple things about Berry Street and Main Street. So, in favor of a roundabout at Berry and Main, I'm going to frame it that way.
I don't see that working.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you for that feedback. And the last one, I don't know how to frame it. Putting in the bike lanes on Main Street.
Main Street?
Yeah, on Main Street, right? I'm solidly like, I've been thinking about other things. I need to.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Don't mention Should we?
Yeah.
That's not mentioned here.
Did we do that already?
We
That's the only other alternative, I think, so.
Well,
We do nothing.
well, right. So I mean, I could have framed it as, would you like a roundabout? And people were, voted.
So you should do the same.
So okay, so fair enough. So signal.
We want action. We're not just.
Okay, I hear you there. So interest in signal. Thank you. Interest in signalizing Berry and Main. Okay. All right. Fair enough. I think that is everything. Am I missing anything at this point? Yes, Jack.
We haven't talked about this on Main Street, although we have talked about it on this streetscaping for State Street, and that is whether, in considering what we're doing with Main Street, should we also be looking at one of the mayor's ideas, which is reverse angle parking.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's mine too.
Is it?
Yes.
And
That's a
I think
long-term
it's an
vision.
intriguing idea. I don't know if, I'm not sure that it's better or worse, but since we're talking about Main Street, we should at least throw it out. And I'm someone who backs into parking spaces. It's clearly safer.
So much safer.
I would. I don't know how you feel about this, but I could picture that being potentially incorporated into our downtown master plan, especially as they are looking at the Elm Street intersection. Potentially, they could.
Well, if you do a roundabout at School in May, maybe those spots in front of the library would be better to have reversed.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's fair. But I thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, it would take some education, but I think it's worth it when we feel like we have that capacity. But I'm glad that we're let's bring that into the conversation too. Donna.
When you come back, is there a way to get information? If you do the signalization, one of my concerns is we end up with turn lanes. And so where do the bike lanes go? So if you look down Main Street and you have signals, I would like to see your rendition of where the bike lanes would go.
So they're actually in there. What happened? That's why the signalization option removes more parking from the streets than the roundabout option. So those parking lanes become the bike lanes. So you look at the
Oh.
parking impacts. The signalization has the most impacts because of that.
Yeah, so when this comes as a final, I guess I need all of it, not just,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you. Thank
So
you.
I guess that's kind of what I wanted to ask before we end here is, ultimately we're looking for some sort of recommendation to proceed with design and construction. It sounds like there's some comfort with some things and maybe not with others. And is there some specific information out there that could be provided to help that comfort level? I mean, we're trying to get us to a point where we have a complete study and we can move on. So anything that can be provided to us to help us get there would be great.
If you have,
I heard some comments about cost.
Yeah, I thought, after the last public hearing, I thought we were going to get cost with this. So that would be really, really helpful.
So with the draft study that was included, there's some costs associated with the preferred alternatives. And that's typically how these are done. They usually don't cost out every option.
Okay, so we should just use those numbers.
Right, but they're only listed for the preferred alternatives.
Yeah.
I think if we can, and I think we've kind of done that a little bit. I hate to kind of price out every option. If there are things that we know are off the table, we can kind of take that off the table and just cost what we think are possible options.
You know what else might help with this too is that, I mean, with this whole vision, I mean, there's a lot of changes that we're talking about potentially with this. And so one possibility is if I'm recalling the old the draft that we did look at that had some short-term recommendations and longer-term recommendations. I wonder if there would be any recommendations about, this is something we should tackle first, based on either the consensus or the urgency, maybe the Barry Main Street intersection is such a problem that that's what we should tackle first, even though it's the most expensive of the things that we're looking at, or should we, and maybe, I don't know if you would feel comfortable doing that, because maybe that's too much policy. Would you rather spend more money first or less money first? But if you had any recommendations about, the order of which to take this, that would be helpful. Having just seen the thumb scales of people at this point, it might be useful to me to see like just a one or maybe 2-page just sort of summary of like this is what this would. Well, maybe that's already exists. Maybe that's what we already have, basically. I'm trying to think if there's any further information that we need, just to have everything sort of in one spot.
So we considered including an implementation strategy with staff recommendations, but it's difficult to. It's a lot more helpful if we have the the preferred alternatives and then go from it instead of trying to make an implementation strategy based on the entire all of the options. So to me, implementation and prioritization would come after we have guidance on the alternatives.
Well, maybe we just need one more meeting with all of us to discuss this. Yeah, Donna.
Well, I think we're sort of just avoiding it. I mean, the vote to me, once you put a signal on Berry Street and State, you're going to keep Memorial. I mean, Tom's right as far as time-wise and resources. We see the cost. So you've got 3 traffic lights that have a strong support, and we have an interest in school at least trying out a roundabout, and that gives you a direction. I mean, that's what I hear. So why not just face what we're saying, folks,
Sure.
and move on?
Should we just vote then? We could just vote.
Yes, I could. I'm listening to you. That's what I heard.
Are we comfortable voting on some of these items then? The only one I'm not sure that I'm comfortable voting on is Memorial in Maine and the bike ped amenities on Main Street. Is that fair? If we leave those 2 out?
You want to see the cost of the Memorial roundabout? Come on, Ann.
I do, but also, I just want it to work.
Well, but it won't work with the other traffic lights. You've done yourself in.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's one or the other. It just doesn't do. I mean, that's what
What do you think, team? Shall we just, maybe we should just vote? How do you feel about this?
I'm willing to try to make a motion and then see.
Lauren?
I'm just wondering, so obviously we have some MTIC membership here that you all are representing, are complete streets committee? Like, are there other voices that might have an interesting perspective that aren't here tonight? Like, would one more meeting, is there anything that we feel like is missing, or is the same stuff? Well, we have your resolutions for MTIC, and I don't know what role Complete Streets plays.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Complete Streets is more of a an education and outreach focused committee, when the MTIC is more of an infrastructure, so it kind of applies to them more than it would the Complete Streets. I think if something the Complete Streets could help with is, if we talked about temporary implementation, they could take a role in that, but they're not necessarily a policy group.
Yeah, I was wondering if they're advocating for a certain perspective, which it sounds like a lot of us share around pedestrian friendliness and other kind of shared, some values that I've heard come out from other counselors. Like, is that perspective being heard from people who think about these issues?
I did attend the last meeting of Complete Streets, and there was not a vote, but a general consensus of concern of pedestrians feeling that traffic lights were safer, particularly for anyone with a disability or visual, because they didn't, but anyway.
Joe, anything further?
I just had one quick question for the consultants. Now, on the Main Street bike pass, is that going to be eliminate parking on both sides of Main Street?
It depends on the facility. In most cases, we're trying to retain it on one or the other side, and it alternates depending on the width of the street. But it's not eliminating it all the way through the corridor. It's just reducing it.
And I guess my way in is I know that during the summer we get a big tourist business, and also the merchants depend on people being able to park fairly near their businesses. If you eliminate the parking, that's going to be a challenge for an already challenging parking situation downtown. That's just my way in.
I would just,
okay, well,
again, with
okay,
with the bike facilities, again, like we said in the beginning, kind of just after a vision here. If it is the council's, I guess, vision to accommodate those type of facilities and accommodate the less confident users, the less confident riders, and that would be the vision. Bike lanes on Main Street would be the final vision without necessarily, and maybe it's not time to implement it yet, but that's what we'd be working towards.
Fair enough. I'll just say for myself, even so, I would like to look at that at a different time. I need some more time with that particular part of it. But that's just me. Glenn, you wanted to make some motion. Do you want to take it in the whole thing, or do you want to do it in pieces?
Why don't I stumble through it, and people can helpfully second as often happens, and we'll see how it goes. But I think I would move that we approve the final draft report with the suggested alternative to look at a roundabout at the School and Main Street intersections.
Is there a second?
Second. So everything else just adopt it as is.
I suppose that does include the Main Street bike stuff too, but fair enough.
Again, my sense, following Corey, is that right now we're just going for the vision. And yes, my vision is.
Okay. Fair enough. There was a second, right? Okay. Further discussion? Connor?
I'm just a bit uncomfortable even like considering eliminating one parking spot with, and asking people to continue exploring this. If ultimately I feel like I would vote against it at the end, so I'm not comfortable voting on that bike path at this point.
On
Not
which
the bike path, I'm sorry,
which
the bike lane,
part?
yeah.
The
Bike lane on Main Street.
On Main Street. Would you like to amend the motion to remove that part?
Is that okay for you?
No.
Sell this outside.
You can still make this motion if you want. You can still move to amend if you want.
Yeah,
Connor.
I'll move to amend.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so we're going to vote on the amendment to take this part out of the motion.
This part being the
Oh,
Main Street bicycle
bikes,
facility.
The Main Street bicycle amenities. Okay, further discussion on that part? Lauren?
I seconded, but just want to be clear. I love the idea of bike lanes. I just feel like I need more information on before adopting anything specific. And I want to
Donna?
pursue it.
I just want to remind, and I don't remember exactly, maybe Corey or Tom does, but this council, a city council, adopted the complete streets, which said our vision was including more real estate for bicycles and pedestrians. This vision statement is just saying, not tomorrow, we're going to eliminate parking. It just says our vision is to support the complete streets resolution that we've already made to go towards bike lanes. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah.
When was that? When did we do complete streets? A year ago? 2 years?
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on this amendment. Further discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And the amendment fails because we do not have 4. So back to Glenn's motion to approve this staff recommendation with roundabout at school in Maine. Is that an accurate representation? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this?
So,
yes, Glenn.
It's occurred to me that I do appreciate the MTIC resolutions here, and I'd be curious if there's any more detail that you can offer from MTIC about how MTIC might envision the Barry and Main Street intersection turning into a roundabout with the rail line going through there. Because that's really my sticking point, is I can't see how that would work well. But if MTIC has information that I haven't heard or an idea of how that would work better than I can imagine it.
No, other than some of us have driven through roundabouts with railroads,
okay.
but whatever their deal was their deal, and at the stop is like anywhere else, it's outside the roundabout you stop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess I'm going to say I am going to vote for Glenn's resolution, and it's not because I don't think and have experienced roundabouts, and we'll still more in the day, but if we introduce one traffic light, to me, it fails, so we have to do all of them. And so I support moving forward. Let's do it.
Donna, I so appreciate you. Okay. Further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, well, thank you. Yes, Lauren?
There were other items on your list that weren't part, like the.
Oh, that's right.
Just curious if we wanted to act on any of them, or if there are things that don't need a motion,
Well,
and we just want to.
The other items on the list included looking into some way to prevent blocking on Langdon Street. And I think
That was in the
that
report, right?
not blocking Langdon. I mean, I remember they're moving the crosswalk.
It's in the bigger report. I don't know if it's mentioned here.
I don't know if it's in the report at all. Maybe.
It was
Oh,
on
it
your
is?
presentation.
Okay. Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah, you presented it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so it's
In one of the
it's a part of it
drawings.
then. Okay.
It's not necessarily part of the recommendation, or is it part of the M1? Back and see.
I'll have to look
Okay.
at
If it's part of the M1, then yes, it's.
Okay, and if
approved,
not,
but-
let's, bring that
Come back.
back to us if you would.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Can-
Awesome.
Before Tom disappears,
Yes.
the fire station used to have crisscrosses in front of it and a sign saying "Do not block," and then they went away. Do you know what happened to them?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't remember the crisscross, and we were wondering about the sign.
It said "Do not block." It was right over top of where the
Yeah.
flashing lights.
We were wondering that ourselves.
Okay.
We're gonna add it back.
I don't know. I've been here too long, Corey.
The
No,
process
just
really
just
made it
wondering
a
if
point.
it was removed with the.
Oh, I
paving
would bet you
project.
maybe even 10, 15 years ago. It got removed, but it used to be there. And you were not supposed to stop in front of the fire station driveway. It was always supposed to be open.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, well, thank you all, and thank you for your work on this. And I also want to thank all the folks who came out to the public hearings on these topics. It was very informative. It was very helpful to hear from people. So we have, yeah, fair enough. about half an hour before I would love to be done. Go ahead.
What are you doing next?
Well, actually, I would love to ask the Krugers if you, what thing would you like to? Oh, so maybe we should
Come on.
do that first.
I just have to stand. I just can't, my knee can't let me sit
Fair
any
enough.
longer.
And Seth, were you waiting around for anything in particular?
Well, just if anyone needed clarification on what I was wanting to propose a discussion topic for a future meeting, I'd be willing to talk about that.
Oh, fair enough. Well, why don't you and I connect about that afterwards? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, because I have some further thoughts on that as well, and would love to chat with you. And Joe, is there anything further you were sticking around for, or Steve? No, okay. All right, so
Just entertainment.
if-
Pure entertainment.
do other people need a break, or are we okay with? Okay, so we're gonna take a 2-minute break, and then we'll take the animal ordinance up first.
Anybody want to smell this before I tell you?
So chapter 8. We're gonna start 8, then 7. Okay. Hey, we're gonna bring it back together here, team. I have 937. Okay, so we are going to examine the Chapter 8 ordinances, which is about animals and fowl. I think it's...
This is the first reading.
Yes, so yeah, I'm going to open the public hearing for the first reading of these changes. Since you're here, would you like to go first?
I'm happy to let, I mean, I don't know how much I need to go first.
Yes, yes, just come.
Sure.
We'll focus on your part.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I'll try to keep this somewhat brief. I can go on this subject.
Okay.
I'm Kevin Fink. I live on Finch Road. 5 years ago, my wife and I purchased a piece of land that had been intended for subdivision on the northern edge of the city. We were intending to build a home and a small farm on it. I was originally pretty hesitant to purchase something within Montpelier city limits with that plan in mind. Cities, even in Vermont, have a reputation for being kind of hostile to people engaged in farming and those types of activities. But we thought about it a lot, and after a while, and spending a lot of time at the farmers market and in all our wonderful community gardens and stuff, decided that Montpelier is clearly a town that cares about local food and understands the joy of watching living things grow under your care. I still love walking around this town, especially this time of year, seeing all the backyard tomatoes, the flocks of chickens, there's herds of sheep, and so many pollinator-friendly flowers that feed the bees we keep. When we were doing that, we were also looking at the existing ordinances governing livestock in the city. And at the time, they were somewhat clunky and antiquated, but in general, weren't so restrictive as to preclude those types of activities. And when I heard the council was going to go through kind of a general ordinance revision process, I thought that was great because it would be an opportunity to kind of tweak and adapt those things to maybe remove some unnecessary or sort of restrictions that no longer made sense. Unfortunately, the revisions that are in front of you do exactly the opposite of that. They impose a new bunch of particularly new implementation that's a concern for me personally as someone who has raised pigs for several years on our property, and they also miss an opportunity to get rid of a bunch of unnecessary, I think, provisions that create limitations for people wanting to, basically undergo farming activities in city limits. I specifically wanted to talk about pigs for a minute because I feel like pigs have a really undeserved reputation. Pigs have a reputation as being filthy and dirty. But the truth is that pigs are intelligent, vibrant creatures who are far tidier than their reputation belies. It's certainly true that pigs can be raised in a manner that creates smell and mess and the like, but that's true of any livestock that is cruelly confined, held in pens without adequate bedding that's not changed frequently enough, or otherwise improperly cared for. The pigs we keep are not like that. We rotationally graze our pigs. They feed on excess product from local food businesses and provide them a way to dispose of ingredients they would always otherwise have to dump or find someone to haul out of there. And they, moving them onto a new pasture is one of my and their weekly joys. They literally frolic when you open up the gates and let them into the new places. They run around and look for slugs and grubs and clover and all the wonderful things. So I really just want to urge you to take the opportunity to not only not make things more restrictive, but also think about whether some of the things, there's some language prohibiting prohibiting the commercial slaughter of poultry within city premises, which is often a real economic lifesaver for small farms. Poultry are usually some of the few things that can be raised at a small scale that often also provide another pathway for excess product and provide side income for a lot of small farms. And so basically what I'm asking is that agriculture is admittedly a thing that is sometimes messy and smelly and pretty much always dirty. But I think this is a town that can understand that and can recognize the value of it, and I would just ask you to not move Montpelier in a direction where people can't grow food for themselves or their neighbors easily. So, thank you.
So I'll just jump right in on this because I think Kevin raises excellent points. We'd had an issue, 3 or 4 years ago with a person, with a group of people had a pig in a very small lot in a very congested neighborhood, and we got a lot of complaints from the neighbors about smell and other things, and found that the terms "in a manner" is to be offensive and some of those were not particularly effective. And I'll be honest with you, when we were drafting and going through this, that's what we were thinking of, and I think we probably didn't think about the larger tracts in town and the places where it's perfectly appropriate and desirable to have these things. And so I don't know if I have a specific language to suggest right here, but unless we just go back to, I think the old one had some limitations on how enforceable it was, but maybe it's just, over lots of a certain size or something like that. I don't know, because I agree. I think we should be supporting this type of thing. So I just tossed that right out. There was no underlying desire to ban this from the whole city.
Donna, do you have any specific language?
I guess I kind of agree with Bill that probably the old language could be massaged a little bit to make it a little more clear, but I think that's kind of the right framework. I do still feel like it's a little unfair to single out pigs, because if you keep 5 cattle in your tiny backyard lot, you're gonna have a hell of a nasty problem too.
But I'm with you about that. Yeah.
But I think that's the right framework. Is that and it's hard to say. I'd hesitate to suggest a size framework, because you don't necessarily need that much space if you do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the threshold is really whether you're creating problems for other people.
Other comments? I agree with all of that. Seems like a good point that any livestock that is kept in a small enough space is going to be unduly smelly, and it can be done poorly. And actually, I don't know if this is the right connection to be made, but it also seems somehow cruel to keep an animal that's of relative size in a very small space. And so I know we're going to take out the cruelty to animals section, but in that spirit, I wonder if there's a way to
I think some of those were taken out only because they were covered by state statute.
Okay.
It wasn't that we were supporting cruelty to animals, but it was addressed in other places. So.
Fair enough. So I'm certainly up for reframing, particularly section 8.3. It's about keeping swine, and either taking it out entirely, or if we want to go down the road of saying, that you can't keep too many animals in too small a space, then there may be some opportunity there. Yeah, Jack.
I don't know much about keeping swine or slaughtering fowls, but it might make sense to consult with someone at the Agency of Agriculture for guidance on how to phrase it so that it adequately protects the public interest and yet doesn't preclude these uses.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that occurred to me is there a potential tie-in with the zoning ordinance because that talks about lot sizes or density levels? Just a thought.
Yeah, interesting.
Permitted uses
Yeah, as a permitted use, that's an interesting thought. Other thoughts? Lauren.
Just want to appreciate you coming out. It's great to get that perspective. We could have moved ahead with this without thinking of those implications. So appreciate that and agree. Looking at language on 8.3 and sounds like a couple of different ways to think about it. I was curious about the poultry or the slaughter in the city. I mean, is that something now? I know it's a topic every single year at the legislature, at the state house. Like, is that something that's also just being now regulated at the state level? That does a city ordinance around it make sense anymore? Is it similar to some of the cruelty to animals and stuff that now is regulated that we would feel, maybe we'd want to look at what the state statute is and see if we feel comfortable with that, or maybe you have some information about that.
I'm happy. I don't know of a perfect command of it, but I can give you a brief. I mean, there are definitely fairly extensive Agency of Agriculture regulations on farm slaughter. There are numerical caps in terms of how many you can do a year, which keep size down pretty significantly. And there's all sorts of requirements about facilities and that sort of thing as well, and limitations actually on what you can even sell. I mean, basically, generally, you have to sell whole animals, which really cuts down on volume for most sellers because most people want to buy butchered animals.
Other thoughts? Jack.
I'll just observe, of all the things we talk about at the city council, who knew that this was going to be the issue that would bring Rosa back to the meeting? It's just wonderful to see you.
I promised to come back and help with the ordinance rewrite, and this one hit very close to home.
What's your suggestion, woman?
Yes. One suggestion that I have is that, you do have a public health officer, so you could think about writing the ordinance in such a way where you leave it to the public health officer to determine if the animals pose a risk to public health. I could see a situation where if there were lots of flies or runoff from manure or something like that. So if you kind of left it to the public health officer to make that determination, that might be a way of giving yourself a little bit more room or something more real than what's currently there, but still, allowing for some discretion.
Great suggestion.
And sorry, I'm Rosie Kruger and I live on Finch Road.
Thank you. So I think that's a great suggestion, and so I assume for a second reading we'll be sending this back to staff to adapt this. And the other, so just to get back to Lauren's point, section 8.6, it says dressing for commercial use prohibited. That is one that I would prefer to strike entirely for our purposes and leave it to the state. If the state is going to regulate on-farm slaughter, I want to not create any further barriers to that. We should be having more locally, particularly locally slaughtered food, rather than less locally slaughtered food. Okay. Anything further on this section? Jack.
I had a question from a resident about section 8-1 about running at large. As written, this section would include dogs and cats and other animals like that. And is that the intent of the ordinance? I assume the answer is yes. But
No, because the next section, which we didn't send out because it was not being proposed for any changes, is a pretty extensive section on particularly dogs and about where leashes are and where they can run at large, and there's a whole special section on dogs.
Thanks.
Well, I think the
I
question
don't
still
think
remains.
Cats are regulated.
What's that, Bill?
I don't think cats are regulated. Even if they were, they wouldn't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fair. Glenn?
So, my reading of the item as it stands is that cats are regulated as domestic animals. I guess that's the question of the definition.
Right.
But I don't know. As a dog person, I'd be okay with regulating cats, but I think that will probably not be popular overall, at least. We might want to accept cats from that section.
That'd be fine with me.
Sure.
Acknowledging that cats cannot be regulated.
You laugh, but we have a lot of neighborhood complaints about cats.
Oh, really?
Tigers and-
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
In people's gardens,
Oh, dear.
flower boxes, having cat fights at night.
Yeah.
It's a big deal in my neighborhood.
Getting at
Interesting.
birds.
Well, would you want to keep that in there, Don? No, okay. All right. Just check.
Maybe
But
for
I'll
the,
probably get calls on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, right. Yeah.
maybe for the next meeting, we should have the entire chapter distributed, including the sections
Yeah.
that aren't proposed to
We
be
will, and
changed.
we'll take a look at this. We may not have, might be a meeting or two before we get a chance to do all this stuff for this one. So.
Okay. Any further comments about this chapter? Okay, so I'm going to close the public hearing, and I think we need to vote on the date for the second reading of this. Is there a motion to that effect?
I
Well,
would
you just
move
say
we
to
s-
be recommended by staff, because I don't know when we'll be.
Oh,
on the
okay.
this one.
I move we set a second public hearing at a date to be recommended by staff.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so it passes.
'Cause we'll
Thank
wanna-
you.
We're gonna wanna look at that, so.
Yep, fair enough.
Have you ever seen the movie Snatch? Okay.
Oh.
You should watch it.
In the meantime, you can continue legally having your pigs.
Okay. All right, so we are on to chapter 7. I don't think we're going to make 10 o'clock here, team, unless, of course, we want to bump this item. I assume we want to take it up, though, eh?
The chapter 7?
Yeah, or would you prefer to bump this to another day?
Oh, I'm going strong. I'm happy to keep going. But if the mayor would like to,
Well, what are other people interested in? I mean, we're approaching 10 o'clock, so. Are you okay? Okay to keep going? Okay, all right, we're gonna make it happen. All right, chapter 7. Comments?
there was,
Jack.
oh, are you going to open the
No,
public
no,
hearing?
thank you. Good call. Get the signal there. So we're gonna open up the public hearing on chapter 7, health and sanitation.
At our last meeting, there was a discussion about some of the definitions, and the new draft that we have from staff includes a definition for recyclables, or it's in the memo we got from them. And I think that was the only real outstanding issue in this chapter.
Yeah, that was, right, so that was added into the list.
And we did change the word from swell to swill. That was nice. That's good. And we have a better definition of recyclables, as you mentioned. The only part that I am still sort of foggy about, and maybe this was something that we were, because we were going to be revisiting this chapter anyway after we had better understanding of what the state was going to do. So we may be revisiting it anyhow. I was unclear for it's the old section 7.2, new section 7.1. On decaying matter, I was not sure if we if someone were composting through a worm bin, but let's say they were not going to use their compost on site. Maybe they were going to give it away or whatnot. Would that be prohibited by this?
Well, and I also was government-sanctioned food waste composting vessel.
I'll confess, I don't really know what that means.
Good. Yeah.
Do we have a sense of what that means?
I don't know how, I think Jamie and Donna drafted this,
Okay.
and she would be the one Donna would be the one that would know. I assume it means that there's some kind of, composting bin that the city gives out.
Commercial?
Could be
This is
commercial.
government sanctioned?
Well, it could be government, I guess you could buy a composting bin that, meets some kind of standard. I don't know. confess I'm not.
So my
much
my
about composting.
condominium has a bin that we do.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not government sanctioned, it's, anyway.
So,
Glenn?
I mean, the way I read this language, that last clause, or composting for on-site use, means that if you're composting for on-site use, you do not have to have a government-sanctioned food waste composting vessel. It's only if you're composting for off-site that you need a sanctioned vessel. And I think that was the thrust of the mayor's point, that if you've got a worm bin and you're giving it away to someone else or something like that, does that have to be government sanctioned? Is that?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm saying.
Can you add some words there to make it clearer? Would you just say composting vessel used for off-site or sold, or what's?
Personal.
I'm sorry?
Did you say personal use?
Personal use? Yeah.
Yeah, for personal use would probably work.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, it's if you're giving it away, that's still personal use.
Okay, so are we just changing on-site to personal?
That Lauren.
So are we prohibiting a commercial composting facility in town through this? So just flagging, so 2020, we're mandating composting for everybody. Nobody's going to be allowed to put food scraps in their trash anymore. So just being careful how we word this, that is actually facilitating what should be a public good thing, and not trying to make it unnecessarily weirdly written that it becomes restrictive, or making it harder for people to do that, like they need a government-approved vessel or whatever. I would just thinking about how to make clear composting is okay. I mean, I don't
So
totally
if
know
you're
what the
commercially composting, you've got to take it up and move it, right? Like if I'm putting compost out so it's got to be in some kind of approved container.
Maybe it's
I
commercial.
think that's the point. Is that
But
well,
maintenance
can
of a
kick it back
composting
and look
vessel,
at
yeah.
it.
I mean, some of them are just like big concrete pads where they just have someone just like, is that a vessel?
Well, and I wonder, I don't know if I like this idea fully, but kind of going back to Rosie's suggestion about the health officer in the previous issue, where I think the reason why this probably exists is because it can be odorous, right?
Yes.
And that's the
Yes.
same as with animals kept in too small a space, and because really, like, I also I forgot to mention, I don't want this to prohibit fermentation, which is technically decaying vegetable matter. If somebody's making wine or kimchi or whatever, right? Like I don't want to be prohibiting that. So, I mean, maybe it's too easy a solution to just kick it to a health officer, but in a certain sense, that's like, well, yeah. I mean, if it's causing a stink and it's a continual problem, then the health officer can take a look at it, and maybe that's. But then what does that do to the commercial composting facilities? But maybe that's worth. But industrial composting facilities are, I assume, already regulated by the state, and so.
So you could put language to
Yeah.
acknowledge that.
Isn't that what the language is trying to do, that it shall not apply to the maintenance of government sanctioned, those that are permitted?
why don't we just get some better advice on this?
Okay.
Instead of trying to make it
Yeah.
up, just
All right.
set it, second reading again to the
Okay.
next meeting, and we'll talk to some experts.
Okay.
Figure out what to do with decaying matter.
Yeah, right, and making sure that we're not prohibiting
Right.
fermented foods. Okay, sorry to continually. We can't prohibit kimchi in this town. It cannot happen.
Works for me.
Or kombucha. Also, I can't say that word. I always say kombucha. I can't say it properly. Okay.
Did this solid waste come from somewhere? Like a reference? It's huge. Of all the definitions here, anyway, I just wondered if it was some official language found somewhere. Just
I imagine Donna came up with it. So.
okay.
Okay, as,
So
so I'm
do you
gonna
need a
close,
motion
well,
to-
yeah, I'm gonna close the public hearing and the motion.
Move to have another second public hearing on this
Next meeting should be fine.
at our next meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Vermont League of Cities and Towns Fair.
Every year, the League of Cities and Towns has its town fair, which is our training opportunity and a bunch of other things, but also has an official voting representative from each community to vote on their municipal policy, which then sets the lobbying standards for the group for the year. As I said, each community is allowed to have one designated voting member. It's always good if it's an elected official, one of the council members. I will be going. I'm on the board of directors. I will be going. So if none of you want to go, I can do it. But it's always good. I think Ashley did it last year and made her presence known. And her pictures
She's
in
in
the
the
brochure.
picture online. I love it. Well, I'm going to go too, whether I'm voting or not, because I really enjoy them. Their sessions are very, and the people you talk to, it's very worthwhile.
Thoughts? Connor and then Jack?
Oh, I was gonna make a motion to nominate Donna to be our voting member.
But I go all the time. Does somebody new want to go?
Jack?
I'm potentially interested. I don't know if we have to decide this tonight or if we could give me a chance to check my scheduling and availability.
I think we have a little bit of time still.
Early bird ends September 13th.
Well, that's for registration, but I think in terms of the voting rep,
I'm
there's
just saying,
yeah.
but he wants to register. He's going to go. September 13th.
And by the way, any of you that are interested in attending, regardless of whether the voting rep, the city obviously supports that and happy to go. It is an interesting time. It's always good. But we do need a voting rep.
Right. And so maybe we can take this up on the September 11th meeting? Okay, great. All right, so that concludes our regular business. Council reports. Who would like to start? Connor.
It's like again, thank Sue Allen for everything she's done for the city. It's I've worked with Sue both in state government and here in town, and I can't think of anybody who exemplifies a public servant just like Sue does. The door was always open if there was somebody who needed something. It didn't matter if a council member was in there; she'd go out in the hallway and make sure they got what they needed. And I think it's a tremendous loss to the city, but we wish her all the best in the future, going down south to the other end of the state there. So thanks so much, Sue.
Okay. Second Connors, thanks to Sue Allen. Thank you. I've been continuing to really enjoy the summer in Montpelier, and I want to recommend that anyone who is available do what I did this past Sunday and get out in the Winooski River while it's relatively easy to wander around in and fun. There's a Winooski River cleanup on Saturday, September 7th, starting at 8:30 a.m., meeting here at City Hall. I'm not sure I'm going to make that one, but I know Kate goes every year, and she seems to really enjoy it, and only sometimes throws out her back. But yeah, just for instance, on Sunday I got to go in a canoe with a couple of other friends in a canoe of their own, and 2 dogs from the high school down to Middlesex, and we stopped at Camp Mead. They had food and live music and families all over the lawn, and we dragged the canoes out and had lunch, and just canoeing down the Winooski River is surprisingly, amazingly fun, especially with dogs, to make it a little more difficult. What's that?
Not cats.
Well, we could try it. The weight of a dog shifting back and forth is one of the things that really makes it good. So yeah, highly recommended. And if anyone is interested, I would go again. I'll just borrow the same canoe from my neighbor that I borrowed this time. And I'll be at Baggitos tomorrow morning, 8:30 to 9:30. I forgot to post on Front Porch Forum, but I'll still be there.
I don't really have a report, but I did want to ask the mayor about the transportation meeting. I've gotten some queries, the one that I believe is on the 18th. And just my idea that I thought you said was that you were looking to see all these groups that do transportation in our area, what their services are and their goals, and how they serve us, yes? What else should they be thinking of?
Do you mean
The people who are coming
the
to
people who are
present.
coming? Oh, what the people are coming to present? Yeah. So I think it's mostly an update on what work they've been doing, and it's an opportunity for the council and the public to just ask some questions about, you know, how sort of where they're at and what's possible, and so that's sort of where. Oh, the other thing I would say is that my hope is that presentations would be about 15 minutes long,
Okay.
and that we'd save some time for questions afterwards. And you know, with the intention that the discussion afterwards might be as long as the rest of the presentation. Does that help? Yep.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think just to follow on to that, I think some of the idea was that for those that are already providing services, GMT and others, to how that's going and where they might be going, and for people like All Earth Renewables who are talking about rail or the on-demand transit. So, how realistic is that? What's their time frame? What are they looking at to get some idea of what might be coming in the future? So a little bit of where are we now? What might be
What we
coming.
see ahead.
Right.
Yep,
What
yep,
are the real
okay.
options? Because we make decisions thinking this may or may not be coming, and it would be good to get a reality check of what.
So you might just want to send a reminder out and do a little more detailed in that.
Yeah, Sue will cover that.
She's like Tom. She's done, right?
Not yet.
Oh, it goes till Friday? Oh, let's see. What can we ask her? Come on.
And I do want to clarify actually about that. Thank you for bringing it up. That I didn't in my article at the Bridge say what time it was happening, but because the intent is it's sort of like a council meeting with no action items. It's just updates. The intent to keep it in line with that, we were thinking to started at 6:30. Does that help? Okay. Make sure that that's clear. Cool.
Just echo my appreciation to Sue. I think Connor summed it up really well, but thank you. We'll miss you. Come visit us. The only thing I wanted to mention was there was a story on VPR the other day about the toxic PFAS in the leachate that's going through our wastewater treatment facility and is going out into the Winooski River and the waters of the state. And I know it's an issue that the entire country is wrestling with, this whole PFAS contamination issue, and the state's doing a bunch of work, and they're going to be looking at leachate and setting standards. And I want us to keep an eye on this. I mean, right now we're basically, and the way it came across in the story was, there aren't really regulations yet on leachate, so we're just going to keep letting it go into the river, which goes into other people's drinking water supplies down the road, and the stuff is at extremely small concentrations, is toxic to human health. So it's just an issue I'd like us to look into. I think there will be data coming out in the next month or so from the state, so I'm just concerned. I certainly don't want us to be, as kind of presented in that story as, well, we get $300,000 a year for this stuff, and we're keeping an eye on the regulations, and I would just hope we're keeping kind of public health and those issues front and center. And so I'm just going to keep an eye on it and see how we want to address it, but I just wanted to raise that. Thanks.
I'll be the last one of the council members. I'm sure Ann will say the same thing, to talk about how great it's been to have Sue working for the city. People love the city of Montpelier, and a lot of what makes it great is the able and dedicated professionals that we have working for us, and you'll be missed.
Yeah, so I am going to say that. Also, Sue, thank you so much for your time with us. It's been such a pleasure to work with you, and I've just been so grateful to have you here. So thank you again. I also wanted, I know Tom is not fully done, but I also just want to acknowledge Tom. I've been so grateful to work with him over the years as well. I just so admire his thoroughness and his professionality, and I'm just so thankful for his service to the city as well. And then I also want to just extend my welcome to Donna Barlow Casey, coming in, filling some of these roles in the interim, and so grateful to be working with her as well. So anyway, just it's a very exciting time, seeing shifting happening, and of course sad to be losing some wonderful folks, but excited too. So anyway, so there's that. I wanted to give another couple updates on some upcoming events. Glenn, I'm glad you brought up the river cleanup, 8:30 Saturday, September 7th. I think it's usually they meet at City Hall to divide up to go to different locations. I am psyched for that. It was one of my favorite days in Montpelier. And then there's also that day is going to be sort of an anniversary celebration of the thrift store at the Trinity United Methodist Church in town. So I just wanted to highlight that and make sure people are aware that that is going on as well. It's going to be kind of a special event for them. There's also so that's also Saturday, September 7th, and that's at noon. They're going to say a few words. And then Saturday, September 14th, is Montpelier's Drive Electric Day celebration. So the State House lawn is going to be full of electric vehicles and other electric stuff. We're looking to get an electric bus, and we're going to have electric lawn equipment and food, and we're going to try to have bouncy houses, and I think I shouldn't promise ice cream, but I know there will be food there, just generally speaking. So that's going to be a great event. I'm looking forward to that. And I feel like there was one other thing that I wanted to highlight here, and I am not seeing it, so I am going to pass. If it comes up, I will maybe jump in again. I think that is it, though. John.
Just like to also mention how much I'm going to miss Sue. It's so funny. Jack, you'll appreciate this. When you first started here, I had this little panic, and I had to go back and check on my old Green Mountain Daily Post to see if I'd ever, beat you up about anything. Oh, no. And I actually found only one mention of you that I'd written in an April Fool's post. That was making fun of something that Governor Shumlin had said at the time. I'll have to show it to you before the end of the weekend. It was, if I do say so myself, it was rather clever. The only other thing I would say is while I've been sitting here this evening, I got invited onto the advisory board for the Cyber Policy Institute initiative at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. Ooh. So I'm typing back, oh yeah, sure. And of course now I've looked at the rest of the advisory board. It's a little intimidating. That's all I got.
Okay. Can't wait to see Sue go. Count the days. No, it has been fabulous. I just echo what everyone said, and we've had a lot of fun too. It's been really fun to work, and the only reason she's actually still here is she has to give me a ride home, the last ride home after the meeting. It's in there. It's been the first interview question for all the candidates. And Tom too. Tom was here. His first meeting is not the director, but he will be still occasionally. You will see him at meetings. He will be working on certain projects and is still our resident expert, but he is going to be, after today, going on a pretty extended vacation. And then, am I correct when I say he's going to be moving his office down to the garage? So he will have less of a presence here in City Hall. He wants to work on stuff, not have all of us interrupting him. So I can't blame him, but he's a huge asset and has done a great job as DPW director, and we're happy that he's going to be around for a while with all of his expertise. And Sue, we're all saying goodbye to her on Friday, and then she's coming back on Tuesday. So she's had the important job of taking all the assistant manager candidates to lunch, and there's one more on Tuesday, so she can't miss that. And we want to, yeah. Yeah, we have. Yeah, we have. So yeah, that was the only other thing I was going to report is we are in the midst of interviewing those candidates and then the DPW director candidates as well. So we'll be done all of that process by the end of next week, and then hopefully do our final reference checks and see what happens. Right? We'll pick some names out of the hat. And at this point, I think we could. So first two have been outstanding. So we're looking forward to seeing the next two.
Hell yeah. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
that's right. John's been on.
There's some great candidates.
So, good. That's all I have.
So I did remember the one other thing, which is just that we did have that public hearing on the energy efficiency disclosure ordinance. And I will tell you that my impressions coming out of that were actually quite positive. There was some concern, but it wasn't the flavor of concern that was like we shouldn't do this at all. I mean, there was one person who did say that, but generally speaking, and even the realtors had some productive thoughts, and there were quite a few realtors actually who said that they were invested in and interested in contributing to this process and wanting to be a part of it in a productive way, and I thought that was just fabulous. So more conversation. It might not look like what we thought it was going to look like, and that's okay, but just having more people at the table is good. So I'll just leave that there. And I think that is it. So unless there's anything further, we're going to adjourn the meeting without objection. 10:19.